Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream. Hope you're doing well as always. Alright. Jesse R, nice to see you again. Moterian, nice to see you. Scowleasy, Dice Goblin, that seems like a name change. Caught this last time, very chill and love the lore. It might be 3 a.m. here, but you'll try and stick around. Thank you. Nice to have you here. Mr. Yada, nice to see you as always. Earthmind, it's been a minute. Scholar of Curlin, I almost called you Scowler. Thanks, Scowleasy. And 2 middle fingers. How's it going? I like the name. Alright, so, did I see the video from The Alchemist? Could you elaborate? I don't believe so. Theory can possibly hold from The Alchemist. Okay, you're I-Man. Sorry, yeah, like, if people change their names and PFPs, you're just, like, a completely different person to me. Alright, yeah, okay. So if you're I-Man, okay, I'll try to remember that, yeah. Alright, Earthmind's usually lurking? Okay. See, I recognize that Guts profile pic, so you stand out to me a bit more. No offense to anybody else. Alright, so, Scally was wondering why you were having violent diarrhea and then you realized the bag of mints you bought are sugar-free. Oh, so it's like those, sugar-free gummy bears. Sorry for your, conflict right now. Hope everything resolves itself, but yeah. Thanks for sharing. Alright, thank you very much, Dice Goblin. I appreciate that. You haven't changed yours in a year and you're more of a lurker? It's weird. Okay, yeah, if you're more of a lurker, that might be why. Because I really do try to pay, like, extra special attention to, like, who's a channel member and whatnot. Because I really do appreciate you guys, like, supporting the channel and everything. So, yeah. Sorry I don't recognize your name. But thank you nonetheless for all the support. The silent support. Even more. Okay, yeah, that's fair. There was like a series of gifted memberships. That's true. All right, yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that one up. All right, so on yesterday's stream, we watched 2 videos. The first was, hold on. Oh, I added a bunch more, so I kind of lost it. Shadow of the Erdtree analysis and speculation by Mostenire, and I watched a little bit more than half of Ontos's video about Elden Ring's metaphysics with duality and non-duality, but I disliked it enough where I just kind of semi-rage quit and was like, I'm drawing a line and I'm like stopping here, which is, I think that's actually a first for the channel. But yeah, those ones are on the list. Oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna get rid of the stuff that I've already watched so I don't, okay. I should have had it at the bottom of the list. Because ever since I accidentally sorted, like auto sorted the list and screwed everything up, it's almost impossible for me to remember what I have and haven't watched at times. Like, oh, this video sounds interesting. I'm like, wait a second. This all seems familiar because I've watched it before. All right. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, so yesterday we watched those 2 videos, and then today I thought we could start off with Elden Ring changed my perspective on games by what I'm assuming is Diode, or at the very least D1 Ode, and then this many of these videos are recommended to me, but this one is kind of interesting just because like I always hear like the cliche of like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, etc. changed my life, but I don't actually think I've really ever watched one of those videos. So I'm curious to see the perspective at play here. And then following up with that, I figured we could watch out the Lore Hunters video on you might want to keep Melina around for the DLC for the Shadow of the Erdtree. And then after that, I figured why not check out Shadow of the Erdtree, a convoluted perspective by a tragedy. And honestly, with this much stuff, or like this much coverage of Shadow of the Erdtree, I'm starting to get a little bit burned out, so I might ease up off of like the Shadow content specifically and start looking at like, you know, more broader Elden Ring stuff, which is, you know, perfectly fine. I'm thinking tomorrow maybe looking at some more like Dark Souls videos. I have somebody on here who's comparing. Okay, yeah. Level T was comparing kingship and individuals in Elden Ring to Dark Souls 2, so I'm curious about that, so I might watch that one tomorrow, and maybe something else Dark Souls related, just to give you guys a bit of a heads up if you are or are not interested in all that. So, and then after this, depending on how much time we have left, I figured we could check out Zafe the Scholar's What's Hiding Behind Marika in Elden Ring, and like the thumbnail is kind of pointing to her shawl behind her, so I'm obviously of the opinion that I believe it's a shawl, but maybe they are of a different opinion. So eager to hear what that's all about. All right, thank you, Eladelia. Nice to see you again. Eric Williams. Everybody click the like button. Marika hides her tail. Oh, no. Okay, so let's go on into the first video of the night with Elden Ring Changed My Perspective on Games, review by D1 Ode. Or Diode, I don't know. Okay. Hey, Kite Tails, nice to see you. Welcome into chat. Yeah, if anybody is not familiar with Kite Tails, she also makes a bunch of Elden Ring lore videos and is a very nice person. So check her channel out if you have the opportunity. I recommend it.
69 hours later, I've finally finished.
And let me know how the volume is. It seems a little bit low on my end.
Needs no introduction. Elden Ring is, at the time of recording this video, From Software's newest Dark Souls game, which at the time of its release, printed the words "You died" on almost every gamer's screens. This game was God of War Ragnarok's fierce competition for the 2022 Game Awards, and it ended up taking home the coveted Game of the Year award. Now, the inner PlayStation fanboy in me wanted to scream robbery given how much I love God of War Ragnarok, but I knew that was a very ignorant thing to do, so I said to myself that
I could totally respect that. I know that I know the temptation of the knee-jerk reaction to like want to prop up the things that you're already familiar with and tear down the stuff that you're not. I'm probably guilty of that too to some degree, and you know, sometimes it is like a bit of a tough pill to swallow and like face your misgivings and like meet them head on, which is kind of why I was playing Hollow Knight on stream like the past 2 weeks. So I never really had anything against Hollow Knight, but it just didn't call to me the way that like many fans of the game seem to have that calling for them. I am pretty glad that I played the game. I enjoyed it a lot more than I was expecting, to be honest, because I wasn't as big a fan of the art style. So I definitely want to give Diode credit here for, you know, looking himself in the mirror and coming to that conclusion. My hype man check is en route. Thank you. Appreciate it. The Ragnarok versus Elden Ring feud was hilarious. You know, I don't really know if I know too much about that. I just figure it's most people not too much, like not, holy crap, words. I just figure it's like normal banter. I didn't know if it like was serious or whatnot. Motirian does think Marika has a tail that's in plain sight. Okay. All right. We'll see if we get to that video tonight. Looking forward to it.
eventually play Elden Ring in order to say that I had the opportunity to play both games and make a fair comparison between them. Fast forward 2 whole years later and I've finally done it. I even stream myself playing it while also uploading videos of the best and worst parts of each stream. With that being said, this video will serve as the capstone for my Elden Ring journey, as far as you know it at least, because I'm still playing this game with another character. Without further ado, let's get into it.
I offer you an accord.
Yeah, it's really quiet. I already bumped up the volume. I'll bump it up all the
Let
way.
me start off by saying that I have never played a Dark Souls or Souls-like game before, so I didn't know what to expect besides the game being incredibly difficult. My mentality was that if all these YouTubers and streamers who have never...
Really, if he got to Melina with only 93 deaths, that's really impressive for a first playthrough. I don't know if he like beelined it to her, but even if he did, that would almost be even more impressive. And I'm assuming he probably had a couple attempts, or maybe this is the first one. 403 deaths in total? Oh, maybe the count is off? Oh, maybe it's for that stream. Oh, man, that'd be wild. Okay. Hey, Stella, nice to see you.
Game before can beat Elden Ring. What's stopping me from doing the same thing? Little did I know.
Melina specific, Melania specific.
An adventure that would become one of my favorite experiences in any game I've ever played. Playing this game for myself made me understand the hype for this game and the other Soulsborne games that came before it. This game begins with the character creation menu, where I kid you not, I spent a good hour or so making what was essentially the opposite of Kratos. Instead of pale skin, I gave him charcoal skin. Instead of having a beard, I made him clean shaven. And rather...
My man should be really glad he started off with Elden Ring rather than like Dark Souls 1, where you spend hours making your character look perfect, only for them to run around the game as essentially like shriveled up beef jerky when they're hollowed. Hey, Banune, welcome on into the stream. Can't stay long. Wanted to say hi. Thank you. Appreciate that. Oops. There we go.
Rather than having a bald head, I gave him a head full of white hair along with a bunch of body hair. Once you finally customize your character's appearance, only for you to realize later on that most of it's going to be covered with armor anyways, you finally start your journey by dying to a boss. They deliberately do this to prepare you for what's going to happen throughout the majority of your playthrough. Anywho, you get taken to the tutorial.
So, yeah, as I've said before on my previous streams, I probably reset my game over 200 times to kill that stupid-ass grafted scion. Just because, like, I was having a lot of issues getting used to the controls of Elden Ring. They felt, like, really non-responsive for the most part. I mean, that's not really the big issue. So, I don't mind, like, if the first boss is designed to teach players to, like, lose. But it does still make me salty to this day that if you do beat the grafted scion, you still have to jump off a cliff and fall to your death and, like, lose all of the runes that you gathered from it. Or at least make it all the way the hell back to the precipice of anticipation to collect those runes, which is just extra annoying, especially like because like the different starting classes have different amounts of runes on hand, which it's like they should all just have 0 essentially, because that's more or less what you're gonna get. Hey, Q with I, nice to see you again. And so yeah, I've expressed this opinion on stream many times before that I am really curious about like what fresh players' perspectives were coming into Elden Ring, because the first Souls-like game that I played was Dark Souls 1, and that was a pretty rough experience because I didn't understand how stats worked and anything, so I made the quintessential noob trap build where I like allocated a little bit into everything because I wanted to try everything, so I was just pretty much garbage at everything as a result of that. And then on my second playthrough, I kind of like figured out what to do, and I allocated my stats way more efficiently, and it was so much easier than my first run. So with Elden Ring's ability to respec, I figured that's not as much of a problem, but I'm just curious like how many players really experience the game. So I'm looking forward to having like another perspective on this. And then Ella Delia said, you think the You Will Absolutely Die experience is an honest opening for their games because it makes its point within the 2-hour time limit to collect a refund from Steam? That's a very interesting point now that you point like the Steam connection out. So to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, I'm a pretty big fan of Path of Exile, like not a crazy amount, but I do really respect the dev team, especially as they've been talking about their plans for the development of Path of Exile 2. I've been catching a lot of the developer live streams, well, the recordings of the live streams, and Well, there's still going to be issues in development and whatnot. Just like the very open approach to like discussing like what kind of player experience they want to build for like brand new players who never even played Path of Exile 1 is just very, very fascinating to me. And Jonathan Rogers, I absolutely love the dude to death. Just like with how receptive he is to like live community feedback, it's like mind blowing the level of access to like the normal player base has to Jonathan in the course of these interviews and the questions that get brought up and how he actually absorbs those questions, thinks about it live on stream, and is like, you know what were we thinking when we first designed this system? We probably could change it. I'm going to talk to the team about that and try to like reevaluate this system. So it's just, I absolutely love that. So anyway, all that stuff aside, the point that I wanted to bring up is when Jonathan Rogers was talking about the very beginnings of the Path of Exile 2 campaign, he said, ideally, we want the players to die anywhere between like 1 to 3 times on the first boss, because that will help set expectations that you're supposed to die in this game and reset and like go through the area or whatnot and like fight the boss again. And just setting that expectation early is kind of a key for players' mindset as they move on, because if you expect to die early on, you're not going to be disappointed when the game scales up in difficulty and then you suddenly die. And so it seems like, you know, part of the core gameplay loop. So I'm actually really excited for Path of Exile 2. I'm definitely not surprised that they delayed it, especially with like how receptive to feedback they've been so far, and with the how they've been looking at other development studios with what's called Last Epoch. I was like, Last Exile? No. Okay. So yeah. All right. Off of that tangent now. Cold Dash, welcome back to stream. And Doggo, nice to see you again. Wait, why and how is there a demon at the Undead Asylum? You never thought about it? That's a good question. Some people believe that the demon is more or less set there by the gods to test what would be the chosen undead. But that's like probably the most commonly held belief, but there really isn't, you know, a full community consensus, as is everything in FromSoft games. And yeah, Scalezi says technically there's 2 there, because you have got the Asylum Demon and the Stray Demon. Okay.
Tutorial area where they make you fight the strongest character in all of the Elden Ring lore at 0.01% of their power for the sake of having a chance to get past the tutorial. From there, you take the lift up and open the door to Limgrave, where you actually start your adventure. Now here's the thing. From Software doesn't actually tell you what to do or where to go. Once you enter Limgrave, you're free to do whatever you want and go wherever you want. Is there a story? Sure. As a matter of fact, the quote-unquote campaign is actually quite linear. However, chances are that you will not follow this linear path. First and foremost, because the game doesn't tell you where to go, so you have to figure it out on your own, which can be rather challenging and, dare I say, a little off-putting if you're doing a blind playthrough, considering how massive the open world is. The second reason is because if you choose to head straight to Margit on your first playthrough without any exploration, you may be part of the 30-something% that gets filtered by him because you were underleveled, especially if you picked Wretch as your starting class.
It is always kind of crazy to see how relatively low those percents are, because that's kind of like the first boss of the game. At least Elden Ring is a lot more non-linear, so in some ways that makes a lot more sense for this game specifically. But just like any game and their achievements, it's kind of surprising, I guess, how many people like actually purchase a game and play it for maybe like to load at the menu screen and that's it. I don't know.
But more on those.
Do needs to try DS1 without help. That's a real challenge. I feel like once you get familiar with the formula and the others, and as soon as you understand stats, Dark Souls 1 is a lot easier. Dark Souls 1 is definitely janky, but there's just something about like the combat of it which feels really good. It has like a really good amount of weightiness, and I don't know, like it's wrong, but it works in like a kind of visceral level that I still don't entirely know how to articulate.
Those later. What I first want to talk about is the story itself. Now, if you just played the game and only experienced the story through the game, you'll be confused like I was. Essentially what happened is that Queen Marika got mad that her son died and decided to screw up the whole world by destroying the Elden Ring. This event is known as the Shattering, and it set the lands between, the area where this game takes place, into turmoil. So what the heck is the Elden Ring and why is it so important? Well, the Elden Ring is basically the ultimate plot device that essentially established order in the lands between because again, it's a plot device. This plot device was housed in another plot device called the Erdtree, and that plot device was able to use the plot device I mentioned earlier to bless the lands between with the grace of the Elden Ring. So basically, this plot device plus that plot device equals no plot, hence why one of these plot devices got destroyed so that our journey can begin. So what do we do? Well, we're considered tarnished, which is a slur for those who have been marked unworthy by the previously mentioned plot devices. However, you being the main character, you say, how about I do anyway, and go about becoming Elden Lord. Now, how do we become Elden Lord? Well, we gotta collect these things called Great Runes, which are basically just fragments of the shattered Elden Ring. We then use these Great Runes to mend the Elden Ring and become Elden Lord despite us being destined not to. Seems pretty simple, right?
Shit.
Yeah, this is a From Software game. Shit ain't easy. But eventually you do make it to the end and you are able to mend the Elden Ring and become Elden Lord. But this being a From Software game, this isn't the only ending this game has. Technically, there are 6 endings to this game, but 4 of them are basically a slightly altered version of the same ending, so there's 3 different endings for the game. The first one being the Elden Lord ending, where despite whichever variant of the ending you get, you don't really solve the problems in the lands between. The 2 plot devices still have control of everything, and all you got was some street cred like some GTA San Andreas mission. As a matter of fact, once you get your 15 seconds of fame on the throne, you're back to business. The second ending is the Age of Stars ending, which requires you to complete Ranni the Witch's questline before reaching the end of the main story. This is considered by many as the quote-unquote good ending because Ranni essentially ushers in a new age of free will that is no longer bound by the plot devices mentioned earlier. But if you ask me, this just seems like the simp ending because you do all of the work and Ranni is the one that benefits from it all. Then we get to my
That's a very interesting way of phrasing it, okay.
favorite ending, the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending.
May chaos take the world, guys. Why is
As
my
you can
dude sounding
see,
like the
this
Count from
is the
Sesame
bad
Street?
ending. I usually don't like bad endings in games because they're either very obviously not canon or the good ending is just better. But the Frenzied Flame ending in Elden Ring not only sees you, the main character, get the credit you deserve for your hard work, but there's also closure with this ending. You burned everything and everyone. That's it. Is it the best solution to the problem presented to us in this game? Obviously not, because that's Ranni's ending. However, this is an effective solution which is good enough for me. Overall, Elden Ring's story is great on its own, but even better if you actually take the time to immerse yourself in the game's lore. This can be done through several means. The primary ones are playing through all of the side content this game has to offer, as well as a simple Google search for those who like to read, or a YouTube search for those that like looking at pictures with some audio. Considering that George R.R. Martin, the dude that wrote Game of Thrones...
So yeah, one way that I like to describe FromSoft games, and kind of also life in general, or at least most things in life in general, is that I do think to a large extent you genuinely get out of it what you put into it. And obviously that's an oversimplification to some degree, but if you're not very interested in the games and you don't put anything into it, that's perfectly fine. You've got what you wanted out of it and you don't need to delve into like any more of it. And then the further you dive into it, the deeper down you go into that iceberg, the more lost you become. So it's a bit of a blessing and a curse, but I mean, you could always back out whenever you want. So that's kind of like the beauty of the games.
Thrones also wrote the story for this game. You can tell that they were cooking. And the music, my goodness, when you launch this game for the first time, you hear the subtle beginning to the main theme.
Yeah, for real. The main theme goes way harder than it has any right to.
And then you get hit with... That's the only indicator you need to know that an epic adventure awaits. And that's just the main menu theme. Wait until you hear some of these boss battle themes. Oh my goodness. Similar to other games I've reviewed them.
Yeah, I wonder how others feel, because I guess to me, I don't know if it's because I've spent more time playing Elden Ring recently or, doing a lot more audio stuff with my videos since Elden Ring has come out, but a lot of the tracks in Elden Ring do feel a bit more memorable to me. Maybe that's also partially because I've spent more time like in game dealing with them. Less so for some of the bosses, but I don't know. I've said this before on other streams that I feel like a lot of Dark Souls music, except with the exception of like Dark Souls 1, so mostly like Dark Souls 2 and 3, they tend to be too bombastic to the point where it just kind of all bleeds together and becomes quite unremarkable for me, with like a few exceptions here and there. Whereas I feel like there's a lot more character to the music of Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, and Elden Ring specifically. Hey Caleb, welcome back to stream. Nice to see you again. And somebody else came in that I forgot to say hello to. But anyway, oh yeah, Chadwick, welcome back to stream. And everybody else who's lurking and whatnot. Yeah, as George Allen says, they utilize a lot more hooks than the older Souls tracks. True story. And Okiman and Crunchy, nice to have you all in. Let the Kitamura hate flow through you. So, yeah, if anybody doesn't know, Yuka Kitamura was like the main composer, I think since like Dark Souls 2 perhaps, and she just recently left FromSoft, so we're probably going to have a bit of a shift in the tonal direction of the music, but I think otherwise the sound design is probably going to remain mostly the same. So, Galaxy Dragon, nice to see you again. Moog's theme is your favorite? I really do like Moog's theme, it's pretty great. George says, Bloodborne's still the GOAT host. Nice. Mr. Yada misses some of the weirdness of Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1's tracks. You feel like it's missing in the later titles, but you do like a lot of the new music. Yeah, I feel like Elden Ring kind of suffers from being too big and not having enough variety, a little bit in terms of its music and definitely in terms of the basic enemy types that we encounter. Caleb says Morgoth's Phase 2 is also incredibly underrated. I feel like Morgoth Phase 2 is probably a bit more underrated just because, like, that fight, I think, is unironically easier than just facing Margit alone. Did she leave before the DLC, or did she still handle? I could not answer that because, I mean, quite often composers, I mean, I don't know, like, the pipeline in which like the songs were produced for Elden Ring. Like it could have been a while ago. She could have had like a back catalog that they're drawing from. So that's a good question. I would expect the DLC to be mostly her, but there might be like more guest artists. And yeah, just to say like she worked like was like the main composer isn't to say that they haven't had other composers. Like I know Ludwig's theme was composed by somebody else and all that stuff. Yeah, I'm kind of like Scaleezy, where I also get too tunnel vision on attacking the bosses to hear the music most of the time. George Allen hates the Godskin Noble track because it's so over the top.
Music in this game is able to set the tone for whatever scene it's used in, and that goes a very long way. Anyways, enough about me gushing over music. My recommendation is to play through all of the main and side content of the game in order to get the full Elden Ring experience, because the story is only a small part of what makes.
That's kind of wild to me because this dude has 69 hours, so like how is he recommending all of the side content? I mean, I'm not going to begrudge somebody for like not doing it all themselves, but it's just kind of like, I feel like Elden Ring is a much larger game than a 69-hour game. Bloodborne was very little, Kitamura? Okay, thank you, Crunchy. Yeah, Crunchy's a pretty big fan. Did you actually come out with your magnum opus, like, FromSoft hate music video yet, or is that still like a process in the works? Maybe I missed it, because I was definitely looking forward to see your video on that topic that I thought you were making, or maybe I just got the wrong impression. It's in purgatory. All right, I feel that. Sorry for, judging up the depths there, but at the very least, if it does motivate you, I am genuinely interested in hearing your take on that stuff. So get back to work. No, it's all good. All right.
Makes this game special. Ladies and gentlemen, I may suck at transitions, but it's time to talk about gameplay. Just like other great YouTubers, I'm also going to split the gameplay into combat and the things you do outside of combat, starting with the latter. As I mentioned in my story synopsis, once you open the door to Limgrave, the game just says go. They don't say where to go, what to do there, or even how to get there. You kinda just have to figure it out on your own. And good fucking luck doing that on your first playthrough, because this game's map is huge. That's coming from a guy whose favorite game prior to playing this one included 8 massive playable areas. Okay, technically it was 4 plus 4 smaller explorable areas, but map. Keep in mind that this map I'm showing here doesn't even include the multiple explorable areas underground, as well as all of the caves, catacombs, graves, and dungeons scattered across the map. Needless to say, you'll spend quite a bit of time maneuvering across the map. Luckily for you, there's no need to walk across the whole thing because early in the game you get a spectral steed, Torrent. Not only can you ride Torrent, but you can also fight on horseback, which is actually pretty effective in this game. On top of that, Torrent can double jump.
Yeah, I was actually pleasantly surprised at having like legitimate mounted combat because I didn't expect it. I feel like I really need to go back and play games like Shadow of the Colossus to see how that stuff was handled, which is probably going to be ultimately unfair because of like the huge time gap between the titles. But yeah, I genuinely can't really think of too many games where there's actual mounted combat, and at the very least, like not like action platformers or however you want to categorize Elden Ring. Maybe you can make a case for like vehicles in other games, like maybe like the Jak and Daxter series or something along those lines. But you know, that stuff wasn't exactly melee at that point in time. Yeah, I guess looking back, I really haven't played what I would consider to be a ton of platformers. I don't know. Eladelia says, a game as huge as Elden Ring really needs a boss rush mode. Yeah, I was really hoping the Everjails would turn out to having boss rushes. You know, maybe it'll be in the DLC, guys. George says, Shadow of the Colossus controls are garbaggio. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I, like, back before Kingdom Hearts 3 released, I got, like, the, deluxe pack or whatnot, and I tried to play Kingdom Hearts 1, and I was like, oh, man, this was definitely a game for PlayStation 2 before developers knew how to use, like, analog sticks, which is really wild to think about now. I honestly, okay, so this is a little bit of a tangent, an aside, because I really considered checking out Semi-Ramblomatic's video about like the language of color in games today, but you know, I thought the other stuff kind of like fit together better. And just like the evolution of controls and how we take them for granted now, it's really surprising looking back when you play games where like these kind of universal truths in terms of like control schemes weren't exactly a thing. So a couple years back, I replayed Jak and Daxter 1 because I really enjoyed it for the PlayStation 2 when it came out. So I got the remastered version, and it was fun and enjoyable. But I was like, man, these controls are kind of rough. Like, it wasn't bad, but it was like trying to relearn how to ride a bike almost. So, yeah. The horse from Shadows of the Colossus is really big. Torrent's more compact and built for agile work, so the comparison isn't fair. Cold Dash says, Borderlands got ruined when they added vehicles. The first was the best. All right, Crunchy, thanks for dropping in. Yeah, no problem. It's always a pleasure having you. You take care.
Which you'll definitely need when doing parkour. If only I could double jump in certain parkour sections of this game. My terrible sense of verticality aside, while exploring the many areas to discover, there's also a bunch of quests that you can do for certain characters. I mean, this almost feels like I'm curling the monkey paw as I speak, but I kind of do wish there was a little bit more parkour. I think we talked briefly about it like yesterday on stream, that it would be nice if there are like a couple more gimmicks throughout Elden Ring or FromSoft games, especially now that we have like a dedicated jump button. You could probably have a better version of like the Ancient Wyvern fight from Dark Souls 3, or more verticality and whatnot. And the reason why I say it feels like the monkey's paw is curling as I speak is because I know the parkour sections are not everybody's favorite parts of Elden Ring by any means, but I think like they could eventually make it good. Maybe not for Elden Ring specifically, but maybe the next title. I haven't played Armored Core to know how well like that kind of movement handles, so maybe you guys in chat can have a more informed opinion on that. But with all that being said, I was a little bit disappointed that there weren't ways to either like mitigate a lot of the drop damage stuff or like ways to extend jumps. I was hoping like certain spells like the dragon incantations could be used to like make an effective double jump or like keep you suspended in the air briefly more, so that way if you jumped down a cliff and then used the dragon spell before you hit the bottom, like you would just like swoop up and then like
not take that fall damage. And kind of like the same thing with Torrent's second jump. I was hoping you could jump off a cliff and then jump before you hit the bottom, before you like took actual gravity damage. And then that didn't work that way. And then the silver, the long tail cat talisman was just it's an item. It exists. It doesn't do as it says, which is very disappointing. Hey Jonah, nice to see you again. Yeah, Yada says, one aspect you liked about the earlier Souls games was making every boss a unique experience instead of a challenging fight. I think part of the reason the bosses felt more unique on like a first playthrough of a Souls game is because you didn't necessarily know the formula. Because like once you do know the formula, it becomes formulaic, like unironically. And I don't know how good of a comparison this is, but like the one example that stands out to me is because I played Demon Souls last, by the time I fought the Penetrator, I was like really disappointed at how easy it was for like a melee swordy boss, just because I've seen so many others. Like he was just so basic that like most bosses in Demon Souls I just one shot because I was too familiar with the formula. Georgia Allen says Armored Core 6 is like the smoothest game ever. Nice. Kyle, nice to see you again. You gotta say you're surprised there's only 2 invisible bridges as well. Oh, God, I hate that. Okay, so the consecrated snowfield / mountaintops of the giant bridge being invisible pisses me off, not because it's invisible, but because like the snow effects are inconsistent. Because if you pull out the telescope, I think you can actually see it a bit better than if you're not. I might have that backwards, but it like the visual. If the visuals are better, I'd be fine with it, but they're not, so I'm angry. Zelda's good. Caleb got Armored Core a year ago, got to the first boss, was destroyed, and hasn't touched it since. Rip and pepperoni, my guy. Vadi's Armored Core video as well, just saying. I've heard good things about it. I know V-Limit also helped edit like really large portions of it, so I'm glad it's doing well then. You never gave it a chance. Fair enough. Joan is a hater of Armored Core. You know what? I don't think I've really heard of actual too many legitimate haters of Armored Core, to be fair. Oh, you want them to do the Souls thing? Well, to be fair, the mecha thing came first. It's mostly a joke, but you have pretty physical addiction to the Soulsborne format. Get wrecked, my guy.
Vary in length, and more often than not, the person you're doing a quest for will end up dying. Nonetheless, unlike other games that just have side content for the sake of having additional content in their game that doesn't even reward anything good, Elden Ring makes side quests almost feel mandatory. Especially if you want to learn more about the game's lore, and most importantly, if you want some of the best loot in the game. Take the Shard of Alexander talisman for example, easily one of the best talismans in the entire game that is obtained from a quest that you can start right from the beginning, which will go on until you reach Fire Mazula. That's basically towards the end of the main story. If you focus primarily on beating the main story, you will miss out on things such as the Bull Goat armor set, the Rotten Wig Sword Insignia talisman, and arguably the best rune farming spot in the entire game. However, there are some quests that are really just tedious more than anything, and either don't give great rewards or just don't make any sense at all. I know it's not encouraged to kill any NPCs in this game, but some of these quest lines make me think that exceptions can be made. Those lame NPC quests aside, I had a great time playing through the other NPC quests, and most definitely used the loot that was obtained through them. The only thing I wish this game had was some kind of tracker for all of these quests, because there's over 30 different NPCs with their own quest line, and it ain't easy keeping track of all of them.
So for anybody listening along, he said the Ghost of Tsushima had the best quest tracking in his opinion. I did play Ghost of Tsushima quite a bit. I actually didn't beat the game because I thought I completed like the first section of the game, and then I got to the second section and there's like a lot of backtracking, and I was like, oh man, I just thought I was done with this. I don't really want to go back, and I just kind of like lost enthusiasm. But I actually did really enjoy myself. I think I might have also had other stuff going on in real life and just kind of like put it down and just didn't get back to it. So that's like another game on my list of games to go back and actually finish. But anyway, I know like we make fun of like Ubisoft quite a bit, and obviously Naughty Dog is not Ubisoft, but I really did appreciate a lot of the design elements they did to like gently guide players along. And while there were like a lot of hand-holding elements, it didn't really feel that egregious to me. I don't know how you guys like feel about like the foxes and stuff, but I feel like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was kind of like Ghost of Tsushima, but too much on the Ubisoft side of things, more than like the Naughty Dog side, if that makes sense. Like, it's just way too much hand-holding, whereas Sushi Ghost was more laissez-faire about it, which I think ultimately made for a better experience. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant to have like the direction of the wind and the foliage interacting with the direction of the wind to guide players towards like, you know, story markers and whatnot. Whoever came up with that idea, genius stuff right there. Just pay attention for real. Jonah has a history of avoiding things that you end up loving in the long run. I feel that. Yeah, and as Doggo says, you kind of vibe with FromSoft not having quest tracking. I feel like it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I know, like... So, okay, I don't know how you guys feel about it in chat, but my mental image of, like, game design throughout the years is that, like, The Elder Scrolls Morrowind is, like, the last bastion in my mind of like the old guard of video games, where there's just a crap ton of missable stuff and you actually have to pay attention to what the hell's going on in the game to understand where to go because of the way that it's presented to the player. Like, NPCs don't exactly know what the hell's going on, so like, oh yeah, you gotta go this way, but then you go that way and it doesn't really match what they say. It's too true to real life in many ways. But anyway, so I feel like Morrowind was the end of the old guard, and then like once you get to Oblivion and Skyrim and onward and around that time, you start to get into that like Ubisoftification problem of games, and then games got really bad for a while there in like really holding the player's hands, in my opinion. And then once Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls, to like a lesser degree, but like obviously Demon Souls didn't really have that like splash that Dark Souls 1 did, where they just kind of like bucked the trend and it's like, no, like we kind of liked the stuff of the old games, like get good and then you'll enjoy the game more. I almost made the comments earlier in the video here that I think one of the best parts about Elden Ring isn't necessarily that it's difficult for the sake of being difficult, but it makes it feel as though like when you finally beat a boss that you've earned it and you've kind of accomplished something, even if it's like ultimately insignificant at the end of the day. I don't really think I've gotten nearly as many like highs from beating bosses or like completing content in any other game than I have in like a FromSoft game, which is probably like one of the biggest parts of its allure to the fan base, I suppose. Caleb will be forever sad that the Kale quest got cut for real. Maybe it'll be in the DLC. I should stop saying that, even as a joke. Jonah misses Jack and Daxter. Although you're sad Jack 4 was canceled, we got The Last of Us out of it. Doggo says you've been playing Nier and there's missable stuff even with the quest tracking. You know what? I have not played the Nier games, and that's like been on my, to playlist for a long time too. Because I heard really good things about them, and they kind of looked up my alley. Okiman thought finding Alexander in that second graveyard is bizarre, or finding Millicent after the Godskin Apostle fight. You don't remember any game hints pointing you in those directions. So there's no hints of it. I actually managed to find both of them on my like blind playthrough. The Alexander thing was a fluke because I was just going back because I thought I could have like missed something in that region. But when you look at Alexander and where he's by the graveyard, that's kind of directly over Jarburg. So it kind of makes sense. Like he's kind of like looking over his hometown before he goes towards Mount Gelmir. And the Millicent thing, do I have a good map to pull up? So if you look at, okay, actually I do. If you look at a map of Elden Ring, when you go up the ruin-strewn precipice into Altus Plateau and meet Millicent here, like next to the Lux Ruins and the Erdtree Gazing Hill. It's more or less a direct line going across Altus Plateau towards the Halig Tree, where you'll see the intersection. Actually, I should open this in Paint. Give me a second. It's almost a direct straight line. Where is my line tool? I'll try to make it a bit bigger for you guys in chat. And we talked about this on the Discord a while back, so I'm going to say like here. And then if I just go towards the Halig Tree, oh man, okay. So yeah, I'm still like on the Halig Tree, but look, it hits this side of Grace almost perfectly. So in my mind's eye, she just took a beeline towards the Halig Tree, came towards like the cliffside. You can still kind of see the Halig Tree and like the consecrated snowfield. So she had to figure out like, okay, well, oops, let's go this way then. And then you encounter her like, you know, around there. So no, it's actually it's further on. What am I talking about? Oh, wait. Is it beforehand? I'm drawing a blank of where she actually is on the map. That's the lift. So where's the chain bridge? Anyway, it's not too important. But, I mean, it makes sense ultimately in the grand scheme of things, I feel. Vassal Park, welcome into stream. Right now you're playing The Last Faith. I haven't heard about that. What's it about? Is it like a Metroidvania, Souls-like, or whatnot? Oh yeah, and Stella, that's an interesting point as well. Like, when we talk about game difficulty, back in the day, games used to come with manuals, and those explain things a lot, or like filled in a lot of the missing gaps of information. But even with that being said, a lot of the super old games also just like encourage players to make their own maps and stuff, which is crazy. We don't rely on that anymore. Like, too much of the game community is interconnected. So like, rather than charting things out ourselves, unless you have like a game that like is a roguelite or like really randomizes, procedurally generates a player's path, most people are just going to like look up guides instead now. Hey, SNX, nice to see you again. And Forgeborge, I don't remember saying hey to you. Or the old games just lie to you. True story. It's cool in concept. It's just awkward to find her in a game this big without just caving and looking it up online. Which, in your opinion, isn't that big of a deal. It's just one of those things. Yeah, I'll admit that I was definitely intimidated by the size and scope of Elden Ring with all of the NPCs. And I devoted a lot of time to trying to figure out a lot of those quest triggers for myself and like sharing them with the community. Like my video about the Stalker of Stormvale, Gustak. That did way better than I expected it would. I just like made it because like, oh man, this is kind of interesting, and then just kind of like blew up on my channel. All right.
Different NPCs with their own quest line, and it ain't easy keeping track of all of them. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure if I did all of them throughout my main playthrough nor my New Game Plus playthrough. At least I did the ones with the loot I wanted, because that's all that matters in this game, especially when it comes to combat. Okay, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this game's combat, so you better go refill your snacks and drinks now before I begin. All refilled? Alright, let's dive into the rabbit hole that is Elden Ring's combat. In order to understand combat, we first need to talk about you, the main character. More importantly, your stats. Unlike other games where the only number in your stats that counts is your overall level, all of your stats count in Elden Ring. This is because there are tons of weapons and armor in Elden Ring which allow for countless build possibilities. This not only makes the game replayable, but it also allows a wider audience of players to experience the game since they can make a build that suits their playstyle. However, in order to create those particular builds, you need to level up your stats in a particular way. There are classes in this game, but honestly, those are just different stat distributions to help you get started with a particular build from the get-go. If you're like me who can't decide which build you want to go for, you can pick the Wretch class, which has an even stat distribution. Certain stats are required to wield certain weapons, and that's kind of the basis of how your builds will go. For example, in my first playthrough, I used the Greatsword, which scales with strength, because big sword do big damage. The objective is to level the stats which scale best with the weapon of choice for your build. Another example I'll use is the infamous Rivers of Blood katana, which I used for another playthrough I did off stream. This weapon's effectiveness scales with dexterity and arcane, which means I should level those stats in order to maximize the effectiveness of the Rivers of Blood. You get the gist of it. Armor has their own separate stats independent of the ones you level up, but some pieces of armor can give a bonus to the stats associated with your level, such as the Okina mask, which adds 5 dexterity. Just keep in mind that whatever you equip has a weight to it, which affects your equip load. Wow, kinda like real life, eh? Pay close attention to this text right here to see what kind of load you're carrying. Whatever you do, make sure it doesn't say heavy, because that affects your movement in combat. Unlike other games I've reviewed in the past, armor cannot be leveled up, so you get what you get. Weapons, on the other hand, can be leveled up using smithing stones. There are 2 types of smithing stones in this game: regular smithing stones and somber smithing stones. Regular smithing stones are more abundant and are used to upgrade most weapons in the game, albeit you need a lot of them, whereas somber smithing stones are used to upgrade specific weapons and are usually harder to find. My recommendation is that regardless of which type of stone you need, you should go about finding all of the bell bearings for the smithing stones so you can buy them at the round table hold. This game also has talismans to further...
Yeah, and as I always say every time the smithing stones and whatnot get brought up, I do wish the merchants had more smithing stones available or weapons upgraded to a certain level to give a better indication of how difficult the area is going to be. And it just really sucks if you don't manage to get one of these bell bearings and or you miss the specific tier of upgrades that you need, because my first time going through the game I didn't get enough of the upgrades to get a tier 3 weapon, so by the time I got that bell bearing I went from a +2 weapon to a +14 weapon. So yeah,
further spice up your build. Like I mentioned before, some of the best talismans in the game require you to do a bit of exploring and or completing a quest. However, a single talisman can turn a good build into a great one. For example, the Lord of Blood's Exaltation talisman makes it so that you deal extra damage once you proc blood loss on an enemy, which paired with a bleed weapon like, I don't know, the Rivers of Blood katana, can lead to big damage. To summarize, level up certain stats to use a certain weapon, upgrade said weapon with smithing stones, and use armor that complements your build, whether it's from a practical or fashion perspective. Then you get the talismans to really get your build going. Now you're ready to fight, or read the words "you died" over and over again. But why is that? Well, this is a Souls game, which means the combat in this game is actually hard. Let's break it down, shall we? First of all, I want to take a moment to talk about the questionable controls in this game. This button is responsible for sprinting and dodging, while this button is responsible for lock-on, switching lock-on, and moving the camera. The dodge and sprinting being mapped to the same button ended up not being as problematic, but whoever decided to map the camera movement to the same control as the lock-on switch needs to be questioned, because
it's kind of funny to hear this complaint because I'm so used to it at this point that it doesn't bother me. I was going to say I did like Lords of the Fallen's approach by having sprint bound to the movement stick, and that felt like way more intuitive than holding down the button to sprint in Elden Ring or any Souls game. But yeah, thinking about this criticism now, maybe it'd be good to have like a dodge integrated into that. And I do wish the games had a bit more customizable control schemes overall. So Bella, nice to see you again. And Bats, welcome to the stream. Doggo saw a new video the other day called "I Finally Mastered Elden Ring," and they were still in Limgrave turtling behind a shield. You mean they're doing all right, but you found it funny? I mean, we all got to learn somewhere. The first time I went through Dark Souls 1, I, just used a big old shield. It wasn't a big old shield. I used a normal ass shield and the halberd to poke enemies at range. It was kind of disgustingly effective, and I was kind of garbage at the game as a result of it, to be honest. Yeah, Caleb says the main criticism you have with From's games is that the interact button is always different in every one of the games, and you have to readjust to the new button after playing a previous game. Yeah, it was really weird for A to not be like the pickup button, but it kind of makes sense to have put jump there. But yeah, I don't know. I do wish there were like more control schemes.
This is the absolute worst thing to have when fighting a group of enemies. No, don't lock on. My obvious skill issue aside, besides the enemy's health bar, you have 3 health bars that you need to worry about. Your red bar is your health that increases with your vigor stat, your blue bar is the FP which increases with your mind stat, and your green bar is the stamina which increases with your endurance stat. Now the health bar is health. Very straightforward. If this bar empties, you died. The FP bar is your mana, which is most important if you're a dirty spellcasting wizard. It's also what you use for sorceries and incantations, as well as Ashes of War, which are basically like special moves. The health and FP bars are replenished with flask. You can allocate which type of flask you are equipped with, as well as increase the total number of flasks, as well as how much a flask can replenish via golden seeds and sacred tears scattered across the map. Then you got the stamina bar, which is what you gotta manage the most in fights, because this rechargeable bar is consumed when you attack, sprint, jump, and dodge. Basically any movement besides walking.
The stamina bar also gets depleted if you block, which might be a little bit unintuitive.
Management of your stamina will get you killed more often than not, so in other words, you actually have to think when fighting rather than just spam. On top of having to think while in combat, some of these enemies have absurd movesets that do insane amounts of damage regardless of your build. This deadly combination is what makes the game difficult, in my opinion. Now, there are things such as summons and blatantly overpowered weapons and builds which can make the game easier, but for the most part you're severely punished even for the slightest of mistakes. This is nothing new for Dark Souls players, and some of them even go the distance by not relying on things such as summons that make the game slightly easier. However, for most players who haven't touched a Dark Souls game before, they struggled a lot. Some of them even go out of their way to complain about the game being difficult and no difficulty option in sight. If you ask me, I think this approach to difficulty is a good thing. Not only does it test the player, but it also teaches them a valuable life lesson. There's no switch that instantly makes things easier whenever you're faced with a challenge. Yes, you can get help along the way, but you ultimately have to face that challenge. That's just a more meaningful way of saying get ready to die a bunch if you want to make it through this game. As long as you make a bit of progress with each attempt, not only will it be worth it, but it'll be all the more satisfying once you finally overcome that obstacle. This is perfectly demonstrated with arguably the best parts about this whole game, the boss fights.
Hey Jordo, nice to see you again. Scal usually like summons that fits the themes of his characters.
Upon my name as Godfrey, the first.
Hey Peanut Bobo, nice to see you again. Who needs summon when you're literally a god amongst gods? Just summon yourself, bro, and then you're literally a god amongst gods.
Elden Ring took everything I knew about bosses and turned it upside down. There's a quote-unquote strategy for beating these bosses, but it's much easier said than done.
The strategy is get good. It's this true Soulsborne response.
Regardless of gear, regardless of level, the bosses in Elden Ring require patience, as well as precise timing with your attacks and dodges. Sometimes it feels like a contest to see who can punish who the most, and these bosses are very unforgiving. They can easily catch you off guard if you're overconfident in your attack windows, and can give you no chance to attack if you lack confidence in those attack windows. You best be ready to die a bunch, because these bosses are literally Einstein's definition of insanity, trying the same thing over and over again expecting a different result. Luckily for you, this ain't physics class. You actually should keep trying, because with every attempt, you do what I like to call downloading the moveset of the boss. Not to mention that some of the bosses in this game are just really fucking cool. Some of my favorites being Radahn, Malekith, Godfrey, and Radagon. Their lore, fighting style, and music that plays throughout these fights, on top of the challenges that come with them, make these boss fights some of the best boss fights I've ever fought, period. However, there's also some less than fun bosses to fight. For me, it was Renala, the Elden Beast, and Rykard, which I don't have footage for. For Rykard, it's mainly because you're given a weapon to beat him, which makes the boss fight trivial, but for the other two, they're the worst kinds of enemies to fight in the game.
It's funny because I kind of view the Rykard fight as a really good gimmick fight, with the exception of I feel like he is a hard vigor check, because if you don't have the requisite amount of HP and you don't burst him down, then there's a very high likelihood that he will either like one-shot you with his big attacks, in his second phase more specifically, or the kind of explodey ghost heads, which just keep spawning, and I just hate that part of the fights. But if that was more manageable, Rykard would probably be one of my favorites. I think it might be the best gimmick fight in all of the FromSoft games. But I do think Renala, at least the first phase, does give a good run for the money there. Not because, like, in some ways I don't really like the Renala fight that much, but there's a lot of small things in the design of it which I think were really good ideas that, if they were just tweaked a bit better, might have worked a bit better. But anyway, really easy to miss the small stuff. But the sound design on that fight is great, but also bad. And what I mean by that is, like, the child which is actively singing is the child that you need to hit, but there's too many sound effects going on in the background to always make it distinguishable enough to know what child to attack. So anyway, yeah. Why I call it a gimmick? Because unless you're using like a spell build, you pretty much have to use the spear to kill Rykard, and Renala's gimmick is you need to kill her little dudes to initiate damage. So it's just not a straightforward fight, which is why it's a little bit gimmicky. Whether or not you think that's a true gimmick could be a matter of interpretation there. Yeah, Okiman says, gimmick fights usually mean fights that rely on one or two unique mechanics for that fight alone. The first time Renala Sweeting grabbed your foot in the cutscene, you were dying. Yada is not a fan of Renala, it's just Deacons mashed with Gwendolyn. Yeah, like that's the thing. I think the Renala fight could have been better, but there are a lot of really good elements kind of hidden underneath the surface of it, which is really interesting to me. And let's be fair here, I don't think a lot of the FromSoft gimmick fights are all that great to begin with anyway. I think the Zelda games by far outcompete FromSoft in that front. Jonah likes the Deacons fight better. Ooh, that's wild. Okay, I thought somebody said something else that I wanted to touch on, but I'm blind and can't see it anymore. Alright, my faults.
All they do is run away and shoot stuff at you. It's even worse for the Elden Beast because that's literally the final boss for the game, and it's the second phase to Radagon who I...
Oh my god, that's so much louder, like... Ow. Okay, so anyway, I did remember, I think it was Okiman who said... Did they ask, or did they... Okay, yeah, you missed the first part of this, but did he label spoilers in this? He seems to be aiming it towards newer players who haven't tried it yet, but is showing off endgame bosses. I actually don't remember if there's a spoiler warning. At the very least, it says Elden Ring changed my perspective on games. Review? Yeah, I don't know. It does seem geared to newer players, but he also prefaced it that like this was his first Souls game, so he's probably just coming at it from that kind of mindset, which is fine. So, yeah, I don't know. Good question, though.
I literally just said is one of my favorite bosses. But that's all fine, because nothing could possibly prepare me for the true final boss of Elden Ring. You know what? I'll let her introduce herself.
I am Melina, Blade of Mikola.
Melina was the last boss I fought not only in my first playthrough but also in my New Game Plus run where I used no summons. Beating her the second time was the last thing I did in Elden Ring period. Why is that? Well, it's because in a game known for being hard, she was and still is the hardest boss in the game. Fighting her without summons demands damn near perfection when it comes to managing stamina, avoiding her attacks, and making the most of your attack windows. The thing with Melina is that she doesn't attack you until you attack her. She's basically a counterpuncher, which is one of the worst people to spar with because you're the one that has to make a move. And
I think that's probably one of the more brilliant parts of her boss design, because it's made more relevant through like the curved sword talisman, or is it the heirloom? Anyway, the whole strat is to get hit and then counterattack, which kind of works with the way that she regains HP. So, yeah, I really like that aspect of her design, but there's a lot of other stuff in that fight in particular, which I'm not as big a fan of by any means. Yeah, no, I think that was a fair point to bring up, Okiman, so don't worry about it. Okay.
When you get her down to 75% HP, she starts doing arguably the most controversial move I done ever seen a boss fight do. The waterfowl dance. Good fucking luck dodging this shit. No matter how many YouTube tutorials I watched, no matter how many times I tried, I cannot fully avoid the waterfowl. As a matter of fact, I had to completely change my build come my New Game Plus run in order to increase my chances of surviving the waterfowl alone. And that
Yeah, on the reels though, choosing a big ass bonk build to face Melina is really difficult to pull off if you're not abusing the game mechanics and like the staggering stuff, because she just will heavily punish that playstyle in particular. Source me, I'm the dude who had that issue. So I know like a lot of other builds can trivialize Melina and the way her AI interacts with like dodging attacks. Notably, like some of the spells, I forget which ones specifically, but like the ones that have like a little bit of a delay where they attack are really good against her in particular. Thank you for that kind emoji-based tutorial, Bella. Honestly, the way that I dealt with her, I don't remember if it was out, out, in, or in, out, out. I'm pretty sure like whenever I saw her jump up, I just sprinted the opposite way, because I know like she's going to clip me with at least one attack if my like spacing is wrong, which is it's just so garbage for melee dudes specifically. Okiman says, you think her health pool regeneration is kind of a mental trick? If she's actually gaining a significant amount of HP back, you're probably dead with how much damage she does. Well, the thing is, it would be one thing if her health regenerated off of like actual significant strikes landed, i.e. non-blocked attacks, but she regenerates health no matter what, which is kind of a bit over the top with, in addition to the nature of her other attacks, which can deal a huge amount of damage or almost outright kill players depending on their level. So if Waterfowl was tuned to be more easily or more consistently dodged easily, it'd be one thing. If she didn't have the health regeneration, it'd be another thing. If both of those factors were reduced, that'd be even better slightly. And to top it all off, she also is a 2 health pool boss fight, which is just like the icing on the cake. Like Melina in many ways is kind of like the guardian ape of Elden Ring. So just with that being said, she's also like way worse than the guardian ape. Actually, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why I said I don't know. Like it's pretty big community consensus that she's the hardest boss implemented yet. I don't know how I feel about that. I do feel like Sword Saint Ishin is arguably more difficult, but by the time you get to Ishin, you're pretty much forced to more or less already have mastered the game, whereas like Melina is build breaking, which is kind of garbage for a lot of players. Screw Guardian Ape. Hey Pigsy, nice to see you again. And Pixie says, you found Big Bonk to be one of the better ways you've killed her. Like I said, if you know what you're doing and can abuse the mechanics, it can be a reliable way. But if you're just kind of doing the vanilla Big Bonk, the baby Unga Bunga, you might have a rough time. And I should also like say, if you're not using Spirit Ashes, because if you have Spirit Ashes, that will definitely make Big Bonk a bit easier. So sorry, I should probably always preface that I typically come into the boss fights with the perspective of going mano y mano. So yeah. Yada says, pairing her actually works well because you can interrupt her long combos. If you can land them, yes. But not every build relies on parries, which is kind of like the whole double-edged sword of like talking about any boss.
That's just phase 1 of the boss fight. When you get to phase 2, Melina reveals her final form and goes full aggro on you with even more moves to insta-kill you with, including an even more powerful waterfowl dance. Are you kidding me? This fight will make you rage, it will make you question life, and it will make you regret playing this game. But if you persevere, if you keep trying, if you never give up, and show a bit of progress with each Melina run, you'll eventually beat her. I'm sure that like other players, defeating certain bosses felt satisfying. However, nothing compares to the feeling of beating Melina for the first time. It's a feeling which cannot be replicated.
So Jedediah says, can you elaborate more on an example of a baby Bonk build versus the other Bonk build I was referring to? Okay, let's pull up an example. Because, spoiler alert, I'm kind of like a lore guy for Elden Ring. I'm not the most knowledgeable of like the super intricate details of the builds. Melina Bonk build. Not that one. Golden Bonk. Maybe this will be good. Oh, Ung Ball. Okay, Ung Ball is kind of unfair. I would click his video, but I mean, it's freaking Ung Ball. Maybe I should. I don't know how well he cheeses it. So, okay. Take this video with a grain of salt, maybe. Okay, no, so this is not what I would call like Big Bonk build. I saw a video where somebody was using like the Giant Crusher. Oh, maybe it was this one. Oh yeah, Elden Ring new game +7 bonking Melina with dual Giant Crushers, no summons. So this is what I would say would be like the big Bonk build when you're actually like abusing the hell out of like the mechanics because you know pretty much everything there is to know. So I'm gonna speed it up a bit. Shaman Lee. I don't know. I can't tell if this is YouTube or the video. Oh, it's YouTube. Okay, guys, I'm so sorry. Why is this like in low speed right now? Let me like super lower the quality. I'm gonna do 360. Oh god, this is garbage. Alright, I'm gonna do 480. Okay, there we go. So basically, this dude is simultaneously taking some of her attacks while dishing out more damage than she can deal, and also staggering her quite a bit in the process. Sorry, oh yeah, sorry about the volume. Let me turn that down for you guys. So he got clipped, but he did not take hardly any damage for New Game +7, you know? So that's like one example of what I would say would be like a big Bonk build versus perhaps like my playthrough against her when I wasn't abusing like a lot of this stuff. I was just kind of like playing, you know, a first blind playthrough. So I was using the Godslayer's Greatsword and not relying on some of the other stuff to like truly facilitate that. So Godslayer's Greatsword plus like Flame Grant Me Strength, which is a pretty good bonk build, but not necessarily super good for Melina specifically. So that's a good question. Sorry I don't have like a better answer for you. It's just like the difference between like knowing how to trivialize the game at New Game plus 7 versus still having a bit of difficulty in base New Game. Yeah, trying to play like a normal ass person. Google slideshow moment for real. Okay.
That only 33% of all Elden Ring players have felt. As cringe as it sounds,
It's actually a pretty large amount. Let me turn it back up.
Of never backing down from a challenge. She taught me to believe in myself, and she really pushed me to the limits of my skill in this game. This is how the ultimate boss fight in any game should make you feel.
So yeah, look at how much damage he took from one of her attacks compared to the last dude in New Game plus 7.
This is how the ultimate boss fight in any game should make you feel. So
I would say he would have like a baby bonk build because it's a bonk build, but it doesn't take it to the next level.
Be able to beat that boss and then finally go outside to watch the sunrise on your front porch. From being a maidenless tarnish to overcoming the ultimate challenge the game has to offer and everything in between, Elden Ring is indeed a game of all time. As a matter of fact, I think it's safe to say that it is now my new favorite game of all time, and we still got the DLC for the game on the way. As someone who has never played a Dark Souls game prior, I can safely say that this game is a great game to start with, and that seems to be the general consensus within the Soulsborne community. It's as addicting as it is rewarding, and I even went out of my way to get all of the achievements for it. If you haven't...
Oh, so yeah, 76 hours on record here.
Played it already, I highly recommend you do before the DLC comes out. But that's going to conclude my somewhat lengthy review of Elden Ring. I hope you enjoyed me rambling about this game because I definitely enjoyed writing and recording this review. As for what's next,
So yeah, for anybody like wondering why I commented on the time he spent playing, it's because at the very beginning of it, he had like 69 hours on record. And then he's like, oh, I recommend everyone do all the side content. And I'm like, oh, I don't think that's enough time to do all of the side content in the game so far. So anyway, I definitely appreciated and liked the perspective that Diode or D1 Ode brought to the forefront here. It's been a topic that's been of great interest to me for a while. So I've gone ahead and linked his video into chat if you want to give him a like as well. Chadwick asks, you just played the game guided hand the whole time to beat it in 76 hours? To be fair, he said he was streaming, so he probably got a decent amount of backseating, whether it was asked for or not, but yeah. I don't think like 76 hours is a particularly terrible time, but I definitely don't think it's enough to have like seen everything, which you don't have to see everything to have an opinion on the game. It's just kind of funny. Stella says, bets on if the DLC will finally give us another 3 full health bar phase fight. Potentially, yeah.
I've been playing Yakuza Kiwami on the side, albeit I took a break from that game because of how addicted I was to Elden Ring. Now, the logical thing to do is complete Yakuza Kiwami along with the other Yakuza games in my Steam library for the sake of my wallet. Yet the From Software hype is really tempting me to get into another one. Don't blame me, blame Miyazaki for making great games. If I suddenly buy Sekiro and play that game for the next month, it's because of him, not that I'd actually do such a thing. Oh.
Let's do this.
Why, hello there.
Alright, so yeah, that was a good video by D1 Ode. So give him a like and sub if you enjoyed it. Alright, so with that video finished, we'll go back into some more like lore-based content with the Lore Hunters, Elden Ring. You might want to keep Melina around for Shadow of the Erdtree. So let's go ahead and dive on in.
Why, hello there. At the time of recording,
Oops.
it is 118 days until the Shadow of the Erdtree comes out, and this is the Elden Wait Countdown, where every day until the Shadow of the Erdtree releases, I'll be talking about the upcoming expansion to make the wait just a little bit shorter. If you'd like to join me on the countdown, please subscribe to Lore Hunter to watch the Elden Wait as it releases. In the first couple episodes, we
Sorry, it's just the auto captions there, spelling it wait as in like weighing oneself. Just caught me off guard.
talked about the Land of Shadow, from the settings, history, to the map design of the DLC. so check those out if you haven't.
So Jedediah asks an interesting question in how much do I think the lore should be impacting a boss's difficulty, or do you think that's an important factor in from creating a boss's difficulty? I think it varies. I don't necessarily think a boss needs to have a significant amount of lore to like justify its difficulty or its existence, as long as it kind of makes sense for like where it is at times. But I mean, FromSoft games, you don't even really need that as a requirement, to be honest. Like the I was gonna say Centipede Demon, but he actually does kind of have a bit of lore to make him make sense. What's a really good example of a kind of difficult boss that has like no lore? So I guess in many ways, Sir Alan could be a good example. He does have a little bit of lore, but his lore doesn't necessarily justify his level of difficulty for Dark Souls 2. But I almost said the One Reborn, but he's not really that difficult. Anyway, yeah. Oh yeah, Chadwick says Final Fantasy super bosses for the lore. Yeah, that makes a really good case that like the Ultima and Omega weapons and stuff are super bosses, but the lore kind of allows for them to be super bosses and whatnot. So yeah, for me, obviously, when the lore aligns to like the boss mechanics, I think both like help elevate each other to new heights. So I think if you're not familiar with Melina, a lot of her combat style can feel like bullshit. But when you do get more familiar with the lore and like realize that, oh, wait a second, if her teacher was the blind swordsman and the blind swordsman is potentially depicted in the curved sword talisman, and the whole point of that curved sword talisman says like, hey, get hit so that way you can deal even more damage to your enemy while they're off balance, aka the Andrew Jackson approach, then it makes a lot of sense for why her style is that way. And kind of helps justify it to me, even though I still do have issues with it. I mean, you know, there's some flavor that goes along with it, which allows me to enjoy it more than if there was nothing there at all.
In this episode, I
The
want
classic
to talk about
Boba Fett problem.
Erdtree and Melina, and maybe not in the capacity that you're thinking. Let's get it.
Oh yeah, I should probably justify the Andrew Jackson comment. So for anybody who may not know, Andrew Jackson was a former U.S. president, I think the 10th, and this dude was a general. Was he a general? Anyway, he was like a top-ranking brass in the Army or the Navy, I forget, and fought in the War of 1812, essentially won and that got a ton of like popularity. So anyway, this dude is kind of like a militaristic badass, kind of a tyrant in many ways, and he would get into like lots of duels and whatnot. And so there was somebody who pissed him off who was renowned for being a phenomenal like dueler, and Jackson's like, okay, I'm gonna let this dude shoot me first so that way I can take my time and aim and kill this guy, because he just like had like that level of anger towards him. And so Andrew Jackson got shot by the guy because duels back in the day were only held with like one, you know, chambered firearms. And so he gets shot like right next to his heart. And then he takes his time to shoot the other dude in the head and kill him. And then like there's another quote with Andrew Jackson's like, if my guy had shot me in the head, I would have still shot and killed him, because he was like that angry at the guy. So there's some U.S. president history lore there for the chat.
Into it. First off, will Melina be in Shadow of the Erdtree? If she is alive, which we will talk about more in a moment, she is who levels up the Tarnished using runes at sites of grace. Even though Miyazaki has said that these graces will be different in the fact that they're from Mikola, beckoning you onward, I assume functionality of the graces will remain the same, and therefore Melina will be around to level you up. However, the function and role of Melina doesn't stop there, and that's where it gets interesting to consider, which we will talk about.
Oh yeah, I want to double check when he came out with this interview or this video. 2 months ago, the 25th, so like a couple days after the trailer dropped. Okay, not a big deal. I was just curious.
in a moment, but one other tidbit suggests Melina has already been to the Land of Shadow before. At the beginning of Elden Ring, Melina gives us the spectral steed whistle to summon Torrent. Now we know officially that Miquella is Torrent's former master, and that he was riding him as he journeyed into the Land of Shadow as seen in the key art.
And again, while I do think it might be a safe assumption to believe that that is Torrent, I also think there is the possibility that it could just be another spirit steed. But with that being said, with the way that we get Torrent and Ranni potentially knowing Torrent's former master, I could definitely see a lot of arguments in favor of it being Miquella. But just, wanting to point out that things aren't always so set in stone.
Following this line of logic, I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that Melina could have journeyed into the Land of Shadow and gotten the whistle from Miquella. Or, another possibility is that Melina came burned and bodiless from the Land of Shadow, bearing the spectral whistle. While this is speculative, Melina's backstory is still largely a mystery, and could certainly get fleshed out as Marika's story of ascending to godhood is a focal point of the DLC.
Actually, now that I think about it, I don't really believe any content creators that I've watched so far have posited that the realm of Shadow might just be where Torrent resides natively as a spectral steed. And if that were to be the case, one could potentially then argue that the Land of Shadow might be a place of spirits and or specters and whatnot. So I don't know how you guys feel about that in chat. I don't know how I feel about it myself, but just kind of some food for thought. And Pixie just asked, do people believe Spirit World equals Dream World equals Land of Shadow? I'm definitely certain that some people do. I'm kind of on a working assumption here that that might be the case until I'm proven otherwise. I'm just going to kind of take them as kind of all being of a kind because of the Miquella St. Trina connection and what I just listed now with the spectral spirit steed of Torrent potentially being there as well and all that stuff. And Eladelia says, you believe Miyazaki's comments that the Land of Shadow used to be connected to the Lands Between in a normal way imply that it's not a different kind of place altogether? Well, it might not have always been a different place, but hold on, let me try to rephrase this. And hey, VLimit, nice to see you again. Even if the Land of Shadow is part of the physical part of the Lands Between, we don't know what happened to it, and it could have been banished to a so-called spirit realm. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if it's anything like Avatar, The Last Airbender, or Legend of Korra, where you have the spirit world layered on top of the normal physical world, and there's certain junctions in which they could interact, and perhaps if the spirit world could be merged with the physical world, who's to say that the opposite couldn't happen, or even a portion of the opposite couldn't happen, if that makes sense. VLimit said, you did a bit. You brought up the possibility that those symbols on the graves are modeled after the same thing Torrent's whistle could have been. That was way back with the first teaser. Okay. Yeah, okay. I don't think I watched your video on that. I was like, did you actually come out with more content? I haven't actually seen anything of yours pop up in my feed for a while, at least relating to Elden Ring. I know you've been busy with other projects. Let me actually look at your channel again, because it's been a minute. Oh yeah, and of course, if anybody is unfamiliar with VLimit, my man makes some great variety videos here. So Armored Core is even bigger than you think now. A full 100% S-rank playthrough of Armored Core. How does Tears of the Kingdom fit into Zelda? Okay, and the Dead Space. So yeah, you really haven't done a whole lot of Elden Ring stuff lately. Okay, yeah. And then we got your teaser. He's busy working on these other projects, yeah. You're trying to have something for the contest, then back to regular content with the DLC. I'm also kind of working for something with the contest. I feel it's going to end up being a bit rough with the rules set up. No free cam mod really makes the cinematography angle a lot harder to manage. How do you feel about that? You're just hoping for a helmet? Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I kind of want the 10-foot statue just for, or was it 15-foot? 10-foot statue, whatever it is, for the sake of having it. But I honestly feel like I would be forced to sell it because it's like, the hell am I going to do with a 10-foot statue of Mesmer? I joked to like some other people that I would just put green pipe cleaners on it and call it a freaking Christmas tree for the holidays. Yeah, Caleb wishes Elden Ring had a free cam. You could have some incredible shots. I've been saying that they need a camera mode for a long time here. Because there's a lot of like tiny details that you just can't really see without the camera mod. Dice Goblin asks, did Marika stop souls from passing on? If so, that would make the Land of Shadow the Deadlands. So this is always a bit of a contentious topic. And if you think Destined Death's removal means that like people or spirits aren't properly dying or aren't properly moving on to the afterlife or the after realms, whatever you're going to call it, then you might be able to make that argument. But it's, still veiled in shadow, to make a bit of a terrible pun there. What would I not do with a 10-foot statue of Mesmer? That's bait. Stella wishes she had 10 feet of clearance in her apartment to have a 10-foot statue to begin with. Alright, gonna go back to the video, guys.
We'll cover a popular theory about Melina and how it could tie into the Shadow of the Erdtree in a moment, but first I want to return to Melina's function and other roles in the game. In the main game, Melina occasionally appears at Sites of Greats and talks with us, either telling us about herself, commenting on something, or giving us lore through spoken echoes of Queen Marika that reside in that place. With Shadow of the Erdtree having Marika's story of rising to godhood being a central focus of the lore, it would make sense for more of those echoes to show up in the DLC. However, there is a fly in the ointment. It'll be possible to go into the DLC after Melina has died or she's abandoned you if you're the Frenzied Lord. Because there's no time travel shenanigans happening or anything, it's logical to assume that if she's dead in the Lands Between, she also won't show up here to talk to us. This alone could be reason enough to not include her at Graces in the DLC. However, we don't know for sure.
So yeah, I actually remember seeing this thumbnail and the title of the video coming out like when it came out fresh, and I really appreciated like having that kind of PSA because it really does make a lot of sense, especially with as little info as we had then. So I definitely want to give like kudos to the lore hunter for having the foresight to make this video, because it's a really important one, I think. And with all of those disclaimers out of the way, I am going to be supremely disappointed if there's absolutely nothing relating to Melina in the DLC, and if there's like nothing else to expand upon like what the hell happens to her in the base game if you cleanse the Frenzied Flame stuff. And I'm going to be eternally salty about that if it doesn't come to be for whatever reason or another. And for anybody who may not know, Miyazaki had another interview very recently, like in the last week or two. It was in Chinese, and he said they don't really have any plans for like the base characters to have appearances in the DLC because of like the timing issues, I guess. And like he was like, well, players could also kill the NPCs, and it could be a bit awkward if they have quests there. But I don't know how applicable that would be to, like, that logic would be to Melina specifically. So there could be a bit of a crossover there, but don't hold your breath, I guess, is kind of the main takeaway. Jonah asks, is Destined Death a good translation from Japanese? So this is a bit complicated because of the way like Japanese works. Pretty much no matter the choice, you're going to lose a little bit of something in translation there. So as far as the localization goes, I think Destined Death is a really good one to make. Part of the issue is, if anybody's familiar with like the Attack on Titan title dilemma, it's a little bit unclear whether the no particle is meant to function as like a modifier, like a noun modifier, or like an adjective, and or whether or not it could be possessive or all these other manner of things. So to give a bit more concrete examples, let's pull up G-Show. This might not work out too well. Hopefully it'll make sense. So let me enable this real quick. Hold on. Unme, no, she. No, she. Alright, so Unme means fate and she means death. So Unme does mean fate or destiny or lot, and then death is death. The issue here is this no character is a part of speech which can indicate possessiveness. It can nominalize verbs and adjectives into modifying like nouns. And if you don't need to know about the God thing or the ending thing, emphasis. Okay, so basically it's a question of whether it's fate's death or destiny's death, fated death, destined death. These are kind of all alternative interpretations that you could come up with, and no matter what you choose, it kind of like leaves the other interpretations out. And whether or not that's ultimately relevant to the text is kind of still open to interpretation, because we still don't fully understand destined death as it exists right now. But I guess, like, to get more pedantic with it, it might become more relevant in other contexts, because the way that the game is localized, it will make terms that are consistent in Japanese appear a bit more disparate in English, because they don't always use the same word, because it can end up making the game sound really redundant in English and not flow very well. So you might just say it's like a difference of writing styles. Maybe Elden Ring isn't written that well, but I feel like this is more of like a language thing where, like, even though Japanese tends to be a bit more repetitive, the thing is, like, words in Japanese aren't quite as defined as they are in English. In my estimation, I don't know how like other learners of the language might feel about this, but like I feel like there's a lot more ways a singular word in Japanese can be interpreted depending on its context than in English. So maybe this isn't the best example, but I remember like when I was first like learning Japanese, I was asking some exchange students like, how do you say funny? And they were like, omoshiroi, which means like interesting. I'm like, oh, wait, I thought omoshiroi was interesting. And it's like, yeah, it's also interesting. I'm like, wait, so how can you tell the difference between interesting and funny? And like, they didn't really understand the question, like the nuance between like how to explain why omoshiroi is both like funny and interesting. So that's kind of like what I mean. Like Japanese is a bit more vague and not as definite as English. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, because I kind of like got distracted in that whole stream of consciousness there. And then El Gusto said, what if the Land of Shadows is an afterlife that is no longer supported because of the Erdtree acting like a reincarnation hub? Yeah, that is one opinion that I've held for a long time, which I think is why like Deathroot mucking up Erdtree rebirth and like Erdtree burial is such a big issue for America. Galamoth, welcome back to the stream. You said, didn't Miyazaki say the Shadowlands are a physical place that's just been sealed off? How could it be a spirit or a dream world? So maybe this will be a good in-world example that might help illustrate my point. So what happens if you go into an Everjail? Are you still physically in the lands between, or are you elsewhere? Are you kind of in a shadow realm? Maybe, we don't exactly know. I don't think the Everjails are necessarily like the Land of Shadow, but maybe that example can help like illustrate things a bit better. So it may have once been part of the physical realm, but what's to say it couldn't become part of the spiritual realm, or like have like spiritual barriers surrounding it, effectively making it part of the spiritual realm, even though it still has like a very physical component, I guess. Galamoth asks, why would Marika first set foot in a dream world? Why would the Erdtree be born there? Those are all very, very good questions that I would like to entertain, but I'll say we don't really have good answers for just yet. So take this with like a heavy amount of skepticism, in that it might just be like a dream realm might be the most fertile place for a magical, metaphysical type of tree to sprout and or be molded into Marika's vision there. It could have just been the place where the Elden Ring was, because if it's like a metaphysical construct, maybe it's like the Triforce where you can like kind of interact with it between realms or dimensions and whatnot. I don't know. But very good questions. Okay, Jonas said, you never understood what destined would mean in that context. It makes you think of like a dead man walking. Okay, I see the angle that you're coming at it from now. So, yeah, as far as like destiny is concerned, oh yeah, that's what I was trying to look up and I got distracted by myself. Yeah, as far as destiny is concerned in Elden Ring, it could relate to things like the stars in the night sky or one's fate that they're born into, which is kind of like connected to the stars and medieval thought, astrology, all that manner of thing. And so if you look at the astrologer robe, if we take the Unmei from Unmei no Shi, the destined in Destined Death, it talks about the sky, night sky no longer cradles fate. So fate is synonymous with destiny in English. So you could still very easily put together that like, oh, maybe fate is meant to have some connection to the destiny behind Destined Death, but it's not quite as cut and dry as the Japanese at times. That was the point that I was trying to make a moment ago and just kind of like got lost in the sauce there. So I know that doesn't fully answer your question there. Let me try to reread that. So we don't know whether or not destiny had a bigger component or affect. We don't know how much destiny affected things in the past and whether or not Destined Death was truly part of the Elden Ring, or if the Rune of Death was meant to guide destiny, and or like how that all works in relation to the Elden Ring. Sorry, that's kind of a bit of word salad there, so I'll try to rephrase that. So if the Rune of Death governs Destined Death, which is related to destiny and fate, then would removing the Rune of Death alter people's fates if they're connected to that rune? So that's kind of like one of the big things that should be considered in this line of thought. And yeah, as Eladelia says, Japanese is a high context language. Yeah, context. Spanish can be like that too. Interesting. Because I know like a lot of native Japanese speakers tend to find Spanish a lot more approachable than English for many reasons. Yeah, any of you guys have wondered whether or not the Land of Shadow is an enormous Everjail? And since they got a whole town into one, yeah, like Ordina, indeed. Definitely others have come up with a theory that it's like an Everjail too. Could the Triforce beat up the Elden Ring? Good question. Maybe. Because doesn't the Triforce actually grant wishes? I don't know. All right, chat. I'm going to ask a very controversial question. Could Ganondorf beat Hoarlu and Godfrey and or Radagon and the Elden Beast? Those are the questions we should be asking.
So we could potentially miss out on lore by going into the DLC with her already sacrificed to burn the tree or having abandoned us. This is something I doubt will be addressed before the release of the DLC, so if you're a lore buff like me, you may also want to consider going into the DLC with Melina still alive, just in case. The Gloam-Eyed Queen is another mysterious figure and one that could show up in the DLC. Quick shout out to Eyes Sewn Shut for asking if I thought the Gloam-Eyed Queen might show up in the DLC, and I do. In the Shadow of the Erdtree there will be the story of Marika becoming a goddess, and we know that the Empyrean, the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and her use of Destined Death was a major motivation for Marika sealing away Destined Death in the creation of the Golden Order. Adding on to that we see the Land of Shadow filled with heretical stuff like omens, the Crucible, fire and fire giants, etc. And there's not an insignificant chance that Destined Death and the Gloam-Eyed Queen show up in some capacity in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. There's a popular theory that Melina is the Glow-Eyed Queen for various reasons, but the big ones are that in the Frenzied Flame ending she can wield Destined Death, and that her eye can be described as gloomy. However, if Melina is the Glow-Eyed Queen, then the DLC would be relegated to giving some more information about her and not featuring her as a character, because there's no time travel involved in this DLC and we have a current day Melina with us. That being said, the Glow-Eyed Queen and Melina both have loose ends, and it would be cool to finally get both Melina and the Glow-Eyed Queen stories fleshed out. But if Melina is the Glow-Eyed Queen, I don't think that she could be a boss or someone you could fight and kill because that would affect the main story, unless FromSoft conceded some story workaround so that killing her in the Land of Shadow wouldn't affect her role in the main game. While possible, it feels a bit inelegant. Not that From hasn't skirted this line before with Garank still remaining at the Bestial Sanctum even after...
Oh yeah, I was gonna bring up other examples from other games, but this is a fun one as well. Yeah, Scaleezy says power scaling is cringe. That being said, isn't Ganon the avatar of all evil? It depends on your version of Ganon. Yeah, but I think the reason you say power scaling is cringe is probably because your favorite character got low diffed. No, but in all seriousness, I do kind of enjoy the chaos in the chat of asking such a silly question. It's just kind of like a fun banter type thing to do. I don't take it too seriously.
After killing Malekith, although there's possibly some time shenanigans in play with Fair Missoula. So there you have it. Melina has a lot of potential in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, but is also something of a logistical nightmare. Let me know if you think Melina will show up in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC and in what capacity. As I've said before, the Elden Wait is a conversation, not a lecture, and I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Speaking of comments, I've gotten a lot of really great comments from y'all, and I would like to answer and give my thoughts about one today. Future Warrior Hero 123 says, what I'm
I recognize that name.
curious about is if Ronnie, Millicent, or other NPCs will have special interactions, depending on when the DLC is tackled. I plan on getting all the way to the consecrated snowfields, but stop short of fighting the fire giant, in hopes that we learn more about Ronnie and Millicent and Godwyn too. So much mystery left to unpack. While Miyazaki stated that the DLC won't affect the main game, I don't think this completely rules out the possibility of there being some special interactions resulting from having played the DLC. For instance, you'd think that Melina would have some thoughts if you had just been journeying around with her brother being beckoned into the Land of Shadow, but we will see. I also think that Mikola's journey may shed some more light on Godwyn, but that's for another video. And based on everything that we've talked about today, I think that stopping your character before the fire giant makes sense, just for the off chance of having Melina be important to show up for some lore in the DLC. And that wraps up this episode. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and subscribe to Lore Hunter to follow along on the Elden Wait. Thanks for watching.
Alright, yeah, no, that was a really good video. I definitely appreciate the kind of heads up that the Lore Hunter brought to light here. So I'm going to definitely go ahead and link it into chat and suggest you all give him a like if you so choose. And right. Hey, El Gusto, welcome back in. Serious question, and you do think Godfrey wins because he's an all-conquering champion like Link? While the Elden Beast and Radagon are the type of beings Ganon would curse or seal and conquer. Interesting. Yeah, and it's kind of funny you're all asking like which version of Ganon. I don't really have like too much of a horse in this race, so I think it might be more fun to do it on like a Ganon by Ganon basis almost. And VLM said Ganon doesn't get enough credit for being a sneaky trickster in the Ocarina of Time version specifically. You really don't like viewing Ganondorf as a concept, like the Avatar of Evil type stuff? Yeah, I can definitely sympathize with you there. Hey, Without Horns, welcome back to stream. How you doing? Ganon is immune to all damage that are not light arrows or the Mastered Sword. Godfrey doesn't have the Triforce of Power? Not anymore. Well, that raises the question of whether or not the holy type damage which is used in Elden Ring is comparable to the holy style damage of the Master Sword. Because you might be able to make the claim, Wait. What's the blade beam style attack in Elden Ring? It's not Sacred Blade because that's the buff thing. Okay, like let's ask if something like the what's it called. I guess it doesn't matter because Godfrey doesn't really use holy attacks, does he? Anyway, yeah, I'll just leave that be. Old Moonlight? That'd be crazy. Eladelia makes a great point in that they feel like Ganon is meant to be defeated by the power of love and friendship to a certain degree, and no one in a Miyazaki game is going to be good for that. The Chapel Dweller, bro. Litany of Proper Death incoming? That'd be dope. Alright, so yeah, that was a good video by the Lore Hunter. So let's go ahead and transition into Shadow of the Erdtree, a convoluted lore perspective by a tragedy. So I definitely appreciate the kind of warning in the title here.
Yeah.
Oh, Bach? Yep, that's a great one as well. Alright, so when was this made? 1 month ago on the 3rd of April. Okay, here we go.
Yeah. It's been a while, but I have a legitimate excuse this time. And that's the end of the excuse. So I'm thinking I'm onto something here, and it's about time I sat down to try to piece together, at this point,
This is some real Honored Madman vibes already.
years worth of lore speculation and make a video. Because aside from being inspired by Joel Haver to make animations, it was the lore of this game that really made me want to make a YouTube channel in the first place. So enough with the yammering on about nothing. Here's my first lore speculation video. Hope you enjoy it. With the release of the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer, although I certainly have more questions now, some nebulous connections started to clear up and at least tentatively settled some aspects of the story and timeline for me. To illustrate what's tentatively settled for me, I think it's best to do 3 things first. First, I'll have to lay out a few beliefs I have about the game that are heavily speculative and or have a very long and complicated explanation of why I believe them that go outside of the purview of this video topic. Second, I'll have to give a brief overview of the framework by which I assess the meaning of items and dialogue within the game. And third, I'll have to cover some other aspects of the lore as a basis of how I got here.
Alright, so I really appreciate and like the approach that he's used here so far to say like, hey, look, a lot of this stuff's going to be speculative, and then just itemizing this stuff to like make it clear where he's going, so it makes it easier to like wait and hear where he's like gonna go with, rather than just like perhaps stopping at every time he says a sentence, which I have a habit of doing at this point.
Some of which may seem disconnected as I'm going over them, but I'll have to ask you to trust that I'm going somewhere. So here are some things about the lore that I'm mostly settled on that I won't go much into here, although I may end up explaining them a bit later in the video. I believe that Melina's the Glowmine Queen. Not exactly an uncommon belief. There are numerous theories about this out there, so this doesn't need much explanation. I believe that Radagon was originally a part of Marika that split off and then returned. This much, it's hard to defend this. It's really just it fits in afterwards when you see the rest of what my theory is.
No, I definitely appreciate how clear he's being here, because that way I know like what framework in which I can like judge his ideas against themselves. So I'm definitely appreciating this right now.
And then the game's lore is heavily inspired by both Western and Eastern ideas of alchemy, Greco-Roman theology and mythology, as well as Christian theology and imagery, Celtic. You get what I'm saying here. There's lots of this stuff and threads and videos out there of evidence of this stuff, so I'll only touch on it briefly. And as noted by the YouTuber Queelag, I think that's how you say it, Miyazaki likes to take traditional Western ideas and turn them on their head. And I'll find the video where they explain this and leave the link in the description. So, here's the general framework for how I assess item descriptions and dialogue in the game. These 2 things are the main ways From Software is sharing the story with us. So the issues that arise from translating Japanese into English aside, I believe their goal is to make sure that putting all of these puzzle pieces together is a reasonable enough task for the player base to accomplish. I don't think they'd, at least very often, attempt to mislead the reader or listener without leaving obvious context clues in the phrasing that would alert them that the item description they're reading or the character they're talking to is attempting to do so.
Alright, this dude's speaking my language. Yeah, Jonah, I will admit that I did kind of age a little bit when he said Queelag, but I mean, if he hasn't played Dark Souls 1, I'm not going to hold it against him. I just felt like, the Matt Damon meme for a moment there.
Taking into account that some characters may not have the full picture of the topic they're discussing and may be unreliable in that sense, I like to take what they say at face value. So this doesn't mean that I don't take into account phrasing that may imply they're lying or that they're sharing specific perspective they have. This just means when a character states something like a historical event as true, excluding the circumstances I just talked about, I take it as true. And
No, I think that's a very fair thing to do, and I definitely appreciate how straightforward he's being about that. And that's probably something I could probably do a bit better as well. Actually, I don't know. I feel like I do talk about that all this time in the streams, but maybe I should highlight that more on like my dedicated lore videos, because I feel like some of that stuff is like lost in the sauce. I might like take it a bit for granted at this point in my channel, I guess. Hey, howdy, nice to see you again.
I hope all that makes sense. Okay, on to the first section of this probably needlessly convoluted perspective.
Marika, Radagon, and the Philosopher's Stone.
Before we start this section, I'll leave a link to the
All right, howdy, you have a good one.
Philosopher's Stone in the description. Going over the alchemical themes in Elden Ring would take an entire video on its own, so check that out if you're unfamiliar with this connection before watching this section. This section, like much of this theory, is going to contain heavy speculation, so if you see certain things differently, just bear with me for a bit and see if as the video goes on, my interpretation starts to make more sense. Starting with the Radagon as Marika, I think that the state we find them in at the end of the game is not how they started. I actually think they began as a completely different individual that wasn't explicitly masculine or feminine, but
okay, so that's fine and fair, because even if one thinks that they were different at one point, you could also start with the belief that they could have been one originally, split in two, and then recombined later on. So this is a good point to bring up, that he thinks that they were originally two to begin with.
a fusion of both.
Yeah, it is almost like he's talking directly to me.
I think they were originally the perfect union of the White Queen and the Red King called the Rebus, which of course isn't an uncommon view at this point. I'll leave a link to a video covering this in the description. So here's some of that heavy speculation, but I think that sometime shortly before or at the start of the Golden Order, Radagon is split off of whatever Marika used to be. This splits the White Queen from the Red King, and one thing that leads me towards this theory is that before her era, it was the era of the Crucible. An era where life seemed to be a chaotic mix of many things. If Marika was born after the Newman arrived in the Lands Between, it's possible that perhaps through one of her parents, that her original form was just as chaotic as life generally was during the Crucible era. In essence, before the split happens, I think there was a being that represented the true finished product of the Philosopher's Stone, if you will, with Marika and Radagon being the Rebus, that was the perfect companion for a complete Elden Ring. Going back to the idea that Miyazaki likes to flip these ideas around, instead of them growing into the Philosopher's Stone or a representation of it, these characters devolved from one. And through splitting, it seems like Marika was trying to single out the aspect of herself that was pure, and to her, this was the ideal of order. You can see this in the way that she seems...
Did I miss it, or did he seem to like go back a little bit and makes it sound as though Radagon came from Marika and not necessarily that he started as a different individual? Or maybe I'm just misinterpreting it right now? I mean, I'm going to continue. I'm just want to see if like chat caught it a bit better than I did.
To view things outside of her ideal that permeate throughout the descriptions concerning Omen, Misbegotten, eventually the Crucible, serpents, and so on. She's crafted a world full of prejudice for anything and anyone that doesn't fit into her ideology. Now, concerning the incomplete fusion that we see in their final state, Mesmer has made something click in my mind. Because Radagon, for someone so dedicated to the Golden Order, has some interesting links to so many things considered blasphemous to that very same order. Misbegotten worship him, Leonine Misbegotten have his weapons and share his hair color, which of course links him to the Crucible. The letters of his name make up the Spanish word Dragona, which in English means female dragon. The red of his hair is mentioned to be a curse of the giant kind, implying either he's part giant or was cursed by them. And considering the framework of my theory so far, it would make sense that Marika, or whoever she was before Radagon originally split from her, would want to divest herself of these aspects of herself in pursuit of her ideal order. Because if they were once a completely unified...
So, obviously, I'm jumping a bit ahead here. So, if he does believe that the Crucible Order is a completely different one from Marika's to begin with, I'm curious as to how he fits in Marika's divinity in the before the Golden Order times in his like estimation of the timeline here. So like, was she always divine, or was there a specific element which coincided with her ascension to divinity, her apotheosis, which also inadvertently created Radagon in her elevation there? I don't know yet. And of course, like this isn't like necessarily limited to him. I kind of have the same questions for pretty much any framework if they like take the alchemical view and whatnot. Hey Kat, nice to see you again. She did hook up with the dragon, okay. Alright, Ass, next, you have a good night. As always, glad to have you in the stream.
Unified being, that would mean that Marika herself was a perfect representation of the Crucible era. Chaotically mixed forms of life made up of so many different types of life, which is why it isn't surprising to me that she ends up having 2 Omen children. And
okay, so my interpretation of his video so far is he still thinks that Marika may have been the god of the previous age in the Crucible, which is perfectly fine. I just want to be on the right page here.
And if Mesmer is her 3rd child, I mean, look at this fool. Blasphemous. One thing.
So, if Mesmer is the 3rd child, is he then saying that Moog and Morgoth are the first 2 children, and then Mesmer happened, and then potentially Godwin? Because, I mean, it seems a little bit weird to put Mesmer there, but definitely not out of the question. And of course, that really goes into whether or not one believes Mesmer to be a product of Radagon in Marika, or Godfrey in Marika, or something else in Marika.
Thing that isn't explicitly linked to Radagon, or at least there aren't any links I'm currently aware of, are snakes or serpents. However, as the Christians out there, or anyone familiar with Christian theology may have connected in their minds already, dragons and serpents can be synonymous in that context. Satan, or the accuser, is referred to as both a serpent and a dragon. There are other themes in Elden Ring, especially with the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer, which we'll get into later, that remind me of specifically Chapter 12 of Revelation. Perhaps some inspiration for the serpents and dragons in Elden Ring, there's Revelation chapter 12 verses 7 through 9. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, the ancient serpent, who was called the devil and Satan. The deceiver of the whole world, he was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And then at the beginning of chapter 12, perhaps this is concerning the Glowmite Queen, Queen Renala, Omen in their horns, and then the Radagon dragon thing. A great omen appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs, in the agony of giving birth. Then another omen appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. In the immortal words of Chael Sonnen, I say that to say this. I think the Marika...
Oh god, a Chael Sonnen reference. Was not expecting that.
...that we see at the end of the game, the supposed queen and ruler of the lands between, is in fact...
Galamoth asks, are serpents prevalent in Japanese mythology? So that's an interesting question. I mean, like, my initial response would be kind of like yes, but I suppose that depends on what you mean by prevalent. So, like, when you say serpents in Japanese mythology, like, my initial thoughts are, like, Yamato no Orochi, which is, like, Orochi, you know, from Naruto, like, the thing that he's based off of, which is essentially, like, a serpent-style Hydra. And that mythos is, like, one of the most popular myths in Japanese folklore, but by the same token, it's not nearly the equivalent level of like the quintessential serpent and the temptation of Eve in the Garden of Eden. So yes and no. And of course, like there's a bunch of other stories with like snakes and whatnot, and like snakes ties to like medicine and stuff like that. Like if you go to Okinawa, like one of their most famous alcoholic drinks is habu sake, which is got the head of a habu snake fermenting along with the sake. So yeah, they definitely have a big role overall in mythology, but not quite as central of a role as like a, you know, Christian theology and whatnot. And of course, like, yeah, El Gusto mentions dragons. So if you want to say like dragons are snakes specifically, then yeah, you could also include them in that as well. Is it good sake though? I've seen very mixed reactions to Habu sake. Yeah, no problem. And thanks for asking.
A false sovereign, and is actually the deceiving and blasphemous serpent. When we look at the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer, there's something resembling a veil over the land of shadow, and many have already connected this both to the baldachin in Marika's chamber, as well as the item that mimics veil, also known as Marika's mischief. This is one of the things that connected the dots that inspired me to make this video, and it gives me the impression that the obscuring of the land of shadow that the illusory Erdtree is doing, as stated in the Shadow of the Erdtree section on the Elden Ring website, is Marika's doing. And to further the case of Marika being a deceiver, we can also look at the Radagon as Marika situation. Not only was this secret kept from nearly everyone in the Lands Between, but her other half, Radagon, was married to Renala, who was at one point her enemy. And as I understand it, it was this marriage that ended, or at least heavily contributed to the ending of the invasion of Liurnia. There's much more that goes into making the case for this, but
let me back that up.
Her enemy. And as I understand it, it was this marriage that ended, or at least heavily contributed to the ending of the invasion of Liurnia.
Okay, to the ending of it. I thought, okay, yeah. No, we're fine. We're good.
There's much more that goes into making the case for this, but first, I'll need to talk about the two-headed serpent imagery that's within Elden Ring. At this point, I'm sure some of you are wondering, where is he going with this? So am I. Just kidding. This theory requires like an excessive amount of other lore interpretation from my perspective to make sense, so please bear with me. Throughout the Lands Between and within the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer, imagery of intertwining two-headed serpents seems to be everywhere. You find one in the depraved perfumer's robe, of which the embroidery, which is the two-headed intertwining snake, is mentioned in its item description, robe worn by depraved perfumers. The embroidery on the apron is itself a curse upon the Erdtree. You find Placidusax in his stasis with his two remaining heads intertwined. You find it in the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer as Mesmer is joined with the two-headed snake. You can see it on the Shadow of the Erdtree Collector's Edition box. But one peculiar place you'll find it is wrapped around the shoulders and stomach of the Abductor Virgins. Now, finding something covered in snakes in the Volcano Manor might not be a surprise, but something curious is that you find one very close to a Godskin Apostle. I'm sure someone has mentioned this somewhere before, but the Abductor Virgin has some striking similarities to the Glowmite Queen in a few ways. For one, she carries with her a baby, swaddled in cloth. When she opens her abdomen, the doors, as you may have noticed, are covered in flesh. But if you look closely at the doors of the chamber, it's not just a random assortment of flesh, it's skin. And who do we know of that is known to swaddle babies in skin?
Yeah, I guess I didn't notice that it was skin specifically, although to be fair here, I also haven't really examined that part of the Abductor Virgin super closely. Actually, I don't really think I've looked at them too closely at all. I think it might have just been like Kite Tail's video where there was like a lot of depth that went into them that I appreciated. And I think I might have seen like a comment in Crunchy's server that like analyzed it a bit, or maybe it was Sinclair Lore's. Yeah. I think the Abductor Virgins are super cool. I just haven't like gotten around to like really examining them yet, I guess. And Meow Laser, welcome into the stream. You have some Cobra Sake, found it in a couch in your house in Oakland. Nice. Have you tried it? Was it good? It was old and leaking through the lid? Oh no. No idea how many years it was back there. Jeez, dude. At least you cleaned it, I hope, or like around that area. Hello, Dad. Welcome on into the stream. You would really want to know what Radagon, Marika, and Miquella would look like when they were normal? You wish the DLC would have cutscenes in the game. When they were normal... Oh, you mean like potentially before, when they were like separate beings? Well, at the very least, we're told that Radagon hated his red locks of hair, so I kind of feel like he probably wouldn't look too different before, from like his boss fight encounter. Is it fair to say the Abductor Virgins are maidenless? Well, that depends. Are the Abductor Virgins maidens themselves? Because if so, their total amount of maidens might just be 1 or 2 if you include the infant thing. Can't be drinking no mystery couch booze. But I mean, it's booze, so it's like a disinfected inherently, right?
You'll see what I'm getting at here. Furthermore, as mentioned earlier, a Godskin Apostle fight is right next to one of these contraptions, making this, in my opinion, more than a coincidence.
Oh yeah, so I don't know how easily or how readily we can compare the Abductor Virgins to the Glowmide Queens specifically, but I also don't necessarily hate this comparison by any means. I don't know if he's going to make this point in a moment here, but I think it's also important to compare the Abductor Virgins to the statue that you see immediately behind Mesmer of what is most likely Marika because of the shawl thing that was pointed out in last stream, the stream before. And her cradling a child is kind of similar to the Abductor Virgins.
Now, looking closer at the snakes, at least to me, these snakes don't seem to be something she's adorning willfully. And to me, they look as though they've wrapped themselves around her and are controlling her. Something I think that strengthens this observation are the 4 ball and chains that are also hanging off of her. But with that, it's time to get into the meat of the heavy speculation in this theory.
The Gek.
As I stated earlier, and this is also a commonly thought thing amongst the Elden Ring community, I am of the opinion that Melina is also the Glowmite Queen. I won't go into why here, maybe I'll do so in a separate video, but for now, it's just important to know that's where I stand with her identity. Plus, there are already a bunch of great videos out there already talking about this theory, so I don't want to rehash that here. So, moving on, I think the implication of this theory means 2 things. One, that if Melina is the Glowmite Queen, then she predates the existence of the Golden Order. 2, that Melina, again, if she's the Glowmite Queen, is most likely not Marika's daughter.
Interesting. So at least for the first point, for anybody who's wondering how he came to that conclusion, I would just also add to it that the Rune of Death was removed upon the creation of the Golden Order, and it's widely regarded that Malekith's defeat of the Glowmide Queen could coincide with the removal of the Rune of Death and or the integration / sealing of the Rune of Death into his sword, but that is apparently quite a contentious topic. So just trying to give a little bit of extra context here. Everyone's convinced at this point? No. Just wait until you meet your detractors there.
Or at least not the Marika we see at the end of the game. We know that the Glowmite Queen's defeat by Malekith and the subsequent sealing of Destined Death kicks off the start of the Golden Order.
Alright,
Therefore,
so
if
I was too
Melina is
early.
the Glowmite Queen, she predates the Golden Order. Marika, as far as we know, doesn't have a consort until after the Golden Order began, so the timeline doesn't line up for her to be one of Godfrey or Radagon's children. Now,
Okay, so he's also then of the opinion that the Golden Order begins with Godfrey, which is pretty much what I expected, but this more or less confirms it there. And our Crusader, I don't remember if I welcomed you in, but nice to see you again.
you may be thinking, what about her saying she was born at the base of the Erdtree, or that her mother is in the Erdtree, or that her internal name in the game files is Marika of Daughter, or she's able to listen to echoes of Marika? Well, hold on. Considering the timeline I just presented, let's list some things we know about the Glowmite Queen, as well as new information from Miyazaki's recent interviews and the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer. She was an Empyrean, she had Destined Death in her possession, she created the Godskin Apostles by swaddling babies in the skin of gods, she was defeated by Malekith, and the Rune of Death was subsequently sealed. The sealing of the Rune of Death caused the flames of the Godskin Apostles to be weakened. There's a weapon referred to as sacred that the Godskin Apostles channeled their flames from. If she was around before the Golden Order, then that means there were gods around before the Golden Order that she killed for their skins. And she was called Queen. Now here is some admittedly heavy speculation, but from this, I believe that the Glowmite Queen wasn't in competition with Marika for the title of God when she was defeated by Malekith. I think that she was already the god. Let me explain.
Alright, so I definitely like a lot of the questions that he brought up, and many of them are like the common questions that I also bring up when talking about the timeline continuity issues of the Glowmite Queen as well. There's one question in particular which I think is probably one of the most important, and I just kind of forgot what it was just a second here. So I'm going to back up just to highlight it and talk about it a bit more.
She was
maybe it's a
Imperial.
bit earlier. Okay.
Timeline doesn't line. We know that the Glowmite Queen's defeat by Malekith.
Hold on.
Queen. I won't go into why here. Plus, there are already a bunch of great videos on. I think the implication of this theory means 2 things. 1, that or at least not the Marika we see at the end of the game. We know that the Glowmite Queen's defeat by Malekith and the subsequent sealing of Destined Death kicks off the start of the Golden Order. Therefore, if Melina is the Glowmite Queen, she predates the Golden Order. Marika, as far as we know, doesn't have a consort until after the Golden Order began, so the timeline doesn't line up for her to be one of Godfrey or Radagon's children. Now, some of you may be thinking, what about her saying she was born at the base of the Erdtree, or that her mother is
Right, so that's kind of like one of the biggest questions, because if Melina / the Glowmite Queen was born at the base of the Erdtree, that would imply that it has to be after Godfrey's ascension to Elden Lord, which I think is probably one of the most critical questions to ask oneself if they are a adherent of the Melina equals Gek theory here. So maybe our mans has found a way to kind of rectify such issues. So I'm going to go ahead and skip back to where we were. We were like at 12:20-ish to continue with his perspective here.
as well as new information from Miyazaki's recent interviews and the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer. She was an Empyrean, she had Destined Death in her possession, she created the Godskin Apostles by swaddling babies in the skin of gods, she was defeated by Malekith, and the Rune of Death was subsequently sealed. The sealing of the Rune of Death caused the flames of the Godskin Apostles to be weakened. There's a weapon referred to as sacred that the Godskin Apostles channeled their flames from. If she was around before the Golden Order, then that means there were gods around before the Golden Order that she killed for their skins. And she was called Queen.
That's probably
now,
a
here
13,
is some admittedly
20.
heavy
Whoops.
speculation, but from this, I believe that the Glowmite Queen wasn't in competition with Marika for the title of God when she was defeated by Malekith. I think that she was already the god.
So he might ultimately be making the point that Marika is Melina, because we are running into that issue of the Erdtree already existing, and if the Erdtree exists and the Glowmite Queen is the god, we might be running into some continuity errors, but I might also be jumping ahead of him. So I'm just trying to keep some of the basic facts correct while also keeping in mind his. So, all right, just trying to take mental notes. And then friend Alex said, you feel like with the Melina stuff and the Frenzied Flame ending, it shows FromSoft definitely has a specific thing they're going for with her, besides just the kindling mating thing. Answer us, FromSoft. Melina specifically says she was born at the foot of the Erdtree and not the Crucible / Great Tree. Right. I mean, that's, we can like leave that aside for now, but yeah, I'll just, yeah. Anyway.
Let me explain.
Where did that come from?
Finger Reader Enya describes Marika as the vessel of the Elden Ring and carrier of its vision. This means, in a sense, it has become a part of her and her a part of the Elden Ring, allowing her to utilize its power to exert her version of order. We can see evidence of this when her body shatters after she shatters the Elden Ring. But when did this fusion happen? Well, we know that the sealing of the Rune of Death started her reign beginning with the establishment of the Golden Order. Finger Reader Enya states, the Rune of Death goes by two names. The other is Destined Death, the Forbidden Shadow, plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation. We know the Glowmite Queen wielded the power of Destined Death right up until the literal start of the Golden Order. And, as I think this is a common interpretation of Enya's words and other sources in the game, the Rune of Death was plucked from the Elden Ring upon the creation of the Golden Order. If that's the case, then that seems to suggest that the Elden Ring was whole until Marika removed the Rune of Death from it. But hold on, we know that the Rune of Death is in use by the Glowmite Queen until she's defeated. You're probably already seeing where I'm going with this, but if the Glowmite Queen was an Empyrean capable of being a vessel for the Elden Ring, and she was actively using the Rune of Death, which was still within the Elden Ring, this means, to me, she was already the vessel for the Elden Ring.
So before like going further into the video, this is kind of one of the biggest issues that I've tried to grapple with over like my channel's history, and why my second video about Elden Ring was about the Glowmite Queen specifically. And I use this as part of my arguments as to why one could come to the conclusion that it might have been Marika who was the Glowmite Queen, and whether or not the Glowmite Queen is just Marika alone, or if that means Melina was Marika, and they're both the Glowmide Queen, essentially, is something to keep in mind. But neither are necessarily contingent upon each other, so it could just be Marika was the Glowmide Queen and Melina wasn't. And yeah, anyway, so this is kind of like one of the biggest quintessential questions we should ask ourselves about the Rune of Death's existence, because if it's part of the Elden Ring, then would that not imply that the Elden Ring should have been under the control of the Glowmide Queen? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe our guy has a solution for these problems here. Hey, so hello, Anthropus, welcome back. Have players ever considered the fact that maybe From had timeline errors that went unchecked and therefore retconned themselves? Just an honest question. So that's kind of like the unspoken question, because to admit that there are actually continuity issues just kind of like exposes what may be a dirty secret in that like the game is inconsistent and it's kind of pointless to therefore talk about the lore. So while I do think it is very important to ponder those questions, I feel like as soon as you open yourself up to that stuff and really take it seriously, it just kind of ends up having you shoot yourself in the face metaphorically here, because you just kind of like unravel the internal consistency and fabric of the game, which there's nothing exactly wrong with that, but it just kind of creates this huge gap which is like kind of insurmountable. So yeah, I've definitely thought this stuff before. I've probably voiced it before to some degree in like the Discord chat when things are probably getting like a little bit crazy, just because I do tend to be a bit more realistic. Like, even though like I look at the lore, you know, semi-professionally as a, you know, star YouTuber joke, ultimately to me it is still just like a hobby, and I do it just because I like being of help and trying to like answer the questions and like sleuth and piece things together. But I really don't take it like that seriously, despite everything. The linguistics is kind of like more the stuff that interests me as a result of this stuff, both the English side and Japanese side of things. All right, Jonah, good luck with operating your crane there. Trying to read everything real quick. Kyle says, it makes sense for the Glowmide Queen to have the Elden Ring first. She was an Empyrean, Marika's an Empyrean too, and she was meant to inherit the Elden Ring from the Glowmide Queen, just like Ranni of the other Empyreans. So we don't necessarily know if Marika had to have inherited it from the Glowmide Queen, but I do think that is a very strong possibility, no matter one's opinion on the identity of the Glowmide Queen, because if she had the Rune of Death and she controlled it and it was in the Elden Ring, does that mean Empyreans could then have their own like runes and not be the vessel of the vision? That's a possibility that hasn't really been explored because we don't really have enough evidence to support it, but we also don't have enough evidence to contradict it either. And Meow Laser, welcome. Oh yeah, I saw you a moment ago. According to Ontus's video yesterday, Marika plucked the Rune of Death and gave it to the Glowmide Queen. Definitely a gray area in the lore. So that's a possibility. I think that interpretation still has like a lot of issues because of the idea of removing the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring versus letting the Glowmide Queen run wild, and then the subsequent sealing of the Rune of Death. Whether or not one wants to think sealing into Malekith's blade happened before the shattering or post-shattering is kind of open to interpretation as well. And then Kyle thinks the Glowmide Queen was the god of Fair Missoula that when she learned of being a new Empyrean. And then Chadwick says that all implies the Elden Ring predates much. I mean, I think most people have the operative assumption that the Elden Ring predates quite a lot of things there. And Joe from Legal, oh no, am I being served? First time viewer, very fun and interesting watch. Oh yeah, thank you, I appreciate that. Welcome to the stream, nice to have you. So Helanthropist is saying, what you're trying to imply is that maybe there's a chance that From doesn't even know their own lore, lol. Like what happened with the lore from Destiny 2 or Dark Souls 2? I'm not sure which D2 you're working with there, because it feels like perhaps maybe both are a little bit applicable there. But anyway, so if you want to also raise the George R.R. Martin question along with that, you might have a point, but we also allegedly do have somewhat of a blueprint from which to work with the George R.R. Martin question. And they could have just taken his stuff and like run with it in a different direction. So there's just so many complications in trying to like come up with some of these answers that it's almost too difficult to know where to begin sometimes. So sorry, that's kind of like a non-answer, but I think it's about as complete of an answer I can give you right now. Destiny 2. Okay. Appreciate that. Galamoth sometimes wonder if Jar Jar Martin and Miyazaki ever spoke to one another in any way. So there have been multiple interviews where they like did have a confirmed face-to-face meeting, but not so much after that, at least. Okay, let's go back to the video now.
That's why she was the Glomide Queen. Now, I know it's also a common theory that she was channeling Destined Death from the Godslayer Greatsword, but let's take a closer look at the weapon and its item description. Sacred Sword of the Glomide Queen, who controlled the Godskin Apostles before her defeat at the hands of Malekith. The black flames wielded by the Apostles are channeled from this sword. The way I read this means the channeling is not attributed to her in this description, but specifically the Godskin Apostles. In fact, the weapon's skill is called the Queen's Black Flame, implying that the Black Flame belongs to her. Now, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that because Black Flames can be channeled from the blade, that she herself did the same. But, as I stated before, Destined Death wasn't sealed until after her defeat, implying that it was in her possession until then. Additionally, once it was sealed, the Black Flames from the sword as well as the Black Flames generated by the Godskin Apostles are weakened, losing their ability to kill gods. The description of the Scouring Black Flame incantation states the following. The Black Flame could once slay gods, but when Malekith sealed Destined Death, the true power of the Black Flame was lost. This implies that her use of Destined Death is what gave these Black Flames the power to kill gods. So what follows from this interpretation is that she had already won the right to rule. Now, it could be that Marika was selected as an Empyrean shortly after the Glomide Queen's era began, just like Millennia, Mikola, and Ranni were already Empyrean long before the Shattering happened.
Sorry, I want to re-listen to that section right there.
To rule. Now, it could be that Marika was selected as an Empyrean shortly after the Glomide Queen's era began, just like Millennia, Mikola, and Ranni were already Empyrean long before the Shattering happened, which implies that the Greater Will had chosen them before Marika had taken any action against the Greater Will. But another possibility is that she was selected as an Empyrean along with the Glomide Queen, and possibly others. Personally, I lean towards the latter. Not only that, but something that links the Empyrean of the current era with each other is they are all siblings. And I think it's plausible that Melina is Marika's sibling. But the sibling speculation isn't all that necessary to the theory I'm proposing. What is the nature of how the Empyrean Marika supplanted the Empyrean Glomide Queen.
Right, so I know he mentioned it earlier, but I am still very curious how he's going to rectify the issue of Melina stating she was born at the Erdtree. I wonder if he's going to say, like, maybe it was her spirit was kind of like born at the the foot of the Erdtree after she was burned. Maybe that could be one way to reconcile those big timeline issues, but yeah, I'm kind of left like wondering. So I'm kind of glad that he said that he thinks Melina could have been a sibling to Marika, although he had like a couple other options listed there. So I'm not entirely sure which one is most favorable to his personal theories here so far, which is, it's fine. I definitely appreciate having all these options. I'm just trying to like keep track of all of them, which is a little bit difficult right now. And Scallyzy says, nah, man, the queen is the sword. So I did posit that as a possibility in my video. I was holding off my comments because I was wondering if he was going to make that claim. But yeah, I do think it could be a possibility that the Godslayer's greatsword might not be entirely different than something like the Sacred Relic Blade, or perhaps even the Fingerslayer Blade. Doggo says, Melina is how we get to Fair Missoula. It's theorized it's a dream. Is it Melina's memory dream thing? So I don't necessarily think Fair Missoula is a dream. It is technically viewable from at least one spot in the base lands between, in that you can see it from the isolated tower where you can power up Melania's Great Rune. I guess I should probably show you guys some footage of that just to kind of corroborate what I'm saying. I'm blind. Where's my footage folder? Okay, there we go. I don't know what I would have labeled it. Okay, no, we're perfect. Contrast, please. Alright, so this is me trying to free cam things. I have no idea what's going on with the contrast here. Anyway, this is Fair Missoula, and you can see it from this Divine Tower. Maybe I have just a better screenshot somewhere. Okay, that's much better. Okay. So this is the isolated Divine Tower, and that's Fair Missoula and the Storm. Which it's still very strange to me that you can't see it elsewhere. So you might be right that this could be like a dream, or like, you know, separated from time and whatnot, but yeah. Our Crusader says, can a sword swaddle a baby is the question. It can if you're a right proper warrior, bro. But yeah, obviously I don't believe the Gek started off as a sword, but ended up as one. El Degusto thinks Mesmer could be the significant other of the Gloamite Queen. That has also been a possibility. If so, that does make me wonder whether the braided thing that's shown on the sinister side of Mesmer's crest could represent the Gloamite Queen. Actually, that wouldn't be too dissimilar from like the helix design of the Godslayer's Greatsword, but it doesn't really match up with any of the other Godskin imagery, so I'm a little bit hesitant to make that connection there. Is that the actual model of Fair Missoula, or just like a placeholder thing? So it gets complicated because like the further away you go from things in Elden Ring, it does switch to like low poly models. So it's the low poly model of Fair Missoula, but it like the geometry does kind of like match, ultimately speaking.
Their golden era.
The Twisting Trees.
The golden era is represented well by Marika's golden tree. However, I don't think her golden tree is the Erdtree. In fact, I don't think that the tree dripping sap in the shadow of the Erdtree trailer is her tree either. I think that's the real Erdtree. But it doesn't belong to her. You see, I think her tree is the tree wrapped around the dripping tree, pulling it down so that the sap drips into the bowl in that building, evoking that twisting two-headed snake imagery once more. Shortly after the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer dropped, there were a bunch of interviews that Miyazaki did. The translations are many, and some of them can completely change the meaning, but one thing that stood out is that he referred to the Erdtree in the title as the golden tree we see in the base game. Now,
alright, I'll let him finish his point.
Some have interpreted this to mean that the Erdtree is synonymous with golden tree, but I disagree with this interpretation.
Alright, so this isn't really like a thing that's up for question, unfortunately, and I don't blame this guy because he doesn't know Japanese, but just for completion's sake here, where is me spreadsheet? Longtime viewers of the stream will definitely be... Oh, I should have made this a lot bigger for you guys before. Alright. Longtime viewers of the stream will know that the Erdtree, let's just type in Erdtree here, is called the Golden Tree in Japanese. Like, consistently, there is no, like, Erde tree or anything like that. It's all Ogonju. Golden Tree, I'm blind, Erdtree. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so Golden Tree. Let's pull up our handy dandy G-show for y'all. So, because this is a made-up compound word, you're not going to get like the direct translation here. So yellow plus gold equals gold, essentially, and then this means like a tree. So just to break it down a little bit further, gold, AU, Aurum. So that's gold, and then, oops, tree. Oh, it's interesting that it comes up with this kanji for it first. Anyway, yeah, it's the other form of it. So it's just tree. Gold tree equals Erdtree. So that's just kind of a bit of an unfortunate product of my guy being done in by... I guess I can't even really call it localization, because I don't know whether the term Erdtree came first or Golden Tree came first, or what would have originated from George R.R. Martin or the desk of Hidetaka Miyazaki, and what the significance is between, like, the difference between them, I suppose, as far as, like, the actual process of the localization and translation goes. But at the very least, like, the title is still called Elden Ring, even in Japanese, so I don't know. He's going to bring up the 2 different types of leaves thing. Oh, it's fine. I'm definitely fine with, like, entertaining this theory. I am just trying to, like, point out flaws or consistencies and inconsistencies where I can. What's the Elden Ring called in Japanese? You almost asked a little while ago. It's literally just like Elden Ring. Hold on. It's like all written katakana, kind of like the same way that demigod is just like demigodo. Elden Ring. Brandish the Elden Ringu. Elden Ringu. So it's just Elden Ring. It's a fair question to ask.
It seems to me he meant that in the context of the title, Erdtree is specifically referring to the golden tree we see in the base game. Well, as I believe was shown by Tarnished Archaeologists in a video they made, the golden tree we see in the game is not what the Erdtree actually looks like, and that the actual tree has very likely been burned before. This is possibly hinted at in the item description of Bernthal's armor. The golden tree shining throughout the lands between is an illusion cast over the real Erdtree, and you can see some obvious evidence of this at the entrance. You can see that wooden bark is surrounding the entrance, and there is a bit of a slit that extends a ways above the door, showing more of that bark.
Alright, so I guess I probably should address this. I was gonna, like, let it go because I'm kind of over, like, talking about this point in many ways, but for anybody who is new to the channel, like, I have, like, a lot of issues with the way that Tarnished Archaeologist approaches the lore. I have, like, many civil disagreements. I do wish their channel does well. I just also wish they refined their approach a little bit and paid a little bit more attention to the text specifically. But setting all that stuff aside, well, I don't necessarily think it's entirely wrong to say that, like, the Erdtree is an illusion. I think it's more like a metaphysical thing, and it's like more of a spectral tree, which is like, oh, well, what's really the difference? The big difference to me is, even if the Erdtree is kind of a spectral tree, I do think it has a physical component to it, if for no other reason that when we burn the Erdtree, all of Leyndell gets covered in ash, which suggests the burning of a physical object, since the land actually gets covered by, like, a physical substance. So may as well bring that up in case anybody is kind of unfamiliar with my take on that. But anyway, I'll let them continue making their point here. Thank you, Galamoth. I appreciate that.
Another theory that I believe is...
Nemo, welcome into the stream. Any chance that English is the correct version? The lore was written by an English speaker, and Souls games are English by default. So that's a very good question. I think that's a very fair question. So with the George R.R. Martin quandary, we do have a very big complication in our approach to Elden Ring, which I think is uniquely different from the approach to other FromSoft titles. So I am very comfortable with saying that, you know, we don't actually know the full story. So any comments that we make about this will be purely speculation. But we do have a large, extensive list of a number of interviews between Hidetaka Miyazaki and George R.R. Martin, where it sounds like George R.R. Martin may have provided, like, some of the characterizations for the demigods and some of the mythos behind the world, but it doesn't seem as though he's, like, you know, written all of the flavor text or anything. And we have Miyazaki saying that George provided like the base kind of mythos of the game as it would have existed like before the shattering and everything. And so they took that basic story and kind of warped and twisted it. And Miyazaki hoped that he would surprise George with like how a lot of his characters ended up in the like retail version of Elden Ring. So with that caveat being said, I definitely believe there's probably stuff that has been like directly inspired by George. I also definitely think there's been stuff that's directly come from the team at FromSoft, because there's a lot of similarities between previous things and other FromSoft titles that I think Elden Ring helps inform us about, and vice versa. And I also definitely think there's validity into thinking that George R.R. Martin's other works can also help inform us of some of the themes going on in Elden Ring. So how balanced we should take those in relation to each other is kind of going to be the eternal question when analyzing Elden Ring's lore. And obviously, like, my channel is focused on my perspective since I can't reliably give anyone else's. So with my focus being more on the Japanese side and the FromSoft side of things, I'm not going to be the best analyzer of George R.R. Martin's contributions there. So that is definitely a shortcoming I have. I should probably familiarize myself with more of Martin's works, but I haven't yet. No real excuses there. I just haven't done it. And moving beyond all of that, if all of this lore was written in English first, I also think it's very crucial to point out that there is a huge localization team that worked on Elden Ring, and that if this lore was all in English first, why would there be an English localization team and not like a Japanese localization team? The only evidence of a like kind of Japanese localization that's given is I think it's like 1 to 3 people on like the draft materials that George created for From Software. I would need to like look at the credits specifically, but that's kind of like one litmus test that I've always pointed to when people are like, oh, Bloodborne was written in English first, Dark Souls is English first, they only have English voice actors. I mean, Bloodborne did get a Japanese dub. But anyway, well, it's true that the lines are voiced in English first and there aren't any dubs. We've gotten confirmation from Frog Nation, the translation company in the past, that they received the Japanese draft materials, then write the English text based off of those draft materials. So straight from the horse's mouth, at least for previous titles. I don't know about Elden Ring specifically, but based on the history, I am confident that a similar thing has happened with some added caveats with the George R.R. Martin situation there. It's covered in spirit ash? Oh no, could you imagine the summon that'll come out of that? 1-star rating, welcome on in. Did I see Emerald Gecko's most recent video where he figures out the Elden language? No, I haven't even heard of it. I think I've seen Emerald Gecko, the name, but no, I'm unfamiliar. Yeah, if you want to comment that video on like the stream comment section directly, I'll probably add it to my playlist. And Nemo says, to clarify, you think English over Japanese may be Miyazaki's intent? The games only have English VAs and of course his inspirations of reading English novels. I understand why people think that way, but generally speaking, at least for Dark Souls and Elden Ring, it's definitely a Western medieval fantasy vibe. So it makes a lot of sense that for his audience that they could play into those sensibilities by having like Western speakers to like fit the aesthetics of the game as well. So that's kind of my interpretation on that stuff specifically. And I guess another thing that I should mention is the types of discrepancies in the translations between the English version and the Japanese makes it very abundantly clear that the Japanese text would be the source material as opposed to the English. So the ways in which Japanese is consistent, whereas English is inconsistent in their use of terminology, is that the words that are taken. So let me try to rephrase this. If English was the base text, the source material of the game, then it would be incredibly unlikely for the Japanese to be as consistent as it is and doesn't reflect the English wordings quite as well, versus if Japanese was the source text, then a lot of the kind of issues that arise in relation to that is because of working from Japanese to English, then vice versa. And also carrying off on that point, you could definitely tell between the Asian languages that the translations are based off of the Japanese, whereas the European languages are based off of the English draft, the English translation of the Japanese draft of the game. And I cover this in some of my Bloodborne videos where like the Korean will exactly match up with the English at times, when I believe the Japanese wasn't, when it was based off of an older draft of the Japanese, because typically speaking, Korean and Japanese grammatically match up way more than English and Korean do. And so for the English and Korean to match, the only way that could possibly work is if they were working with the same base material, which would be the Japanese. So that's kind of like my litany of evidence to suggest that Japanese is the source material, at least for like their other games. But I am willing to admit that there's probably a big component of Martin's work which we don't fully know how it shaped the world of Elden Ring. But very good questions, and I'm happy to address them when they come up. Gecko is unhinged, but you like his videos? Yeah. Galamoth says, has FromSoft ever come out and corrected themselves on anything lore-wise? You mean like in an interview or anything like that? Kind of. I mean, we get a lot of extra additional context from some interviews, but Miyazaki tends to play things very diplomatically and try to leave fans to their own devices. So, one example which comes to my mind would be the Drained of Blood interview, I think, that came out with Bloodborne, where the whole topic of pale blood doesn't necessarily get corrected. I mean, it kind of does, but it kind of doesn't. It kind of gets elaborated on, which gives us a more informed picture of what's going on with pale blood and Bloodborne. And when the interviewer asks, like, is pale blood this thing, Miyazaki's like that's an interpretation, but Miyazaki doesn't say whether that's a correct or an incorrect interpretation. He just says that's one way to read the text, which in my mind means, because it's not like as much of an agreement thing, it's kind of what's left unsaid is that it's probably not the one that they were going for in the game, which kind of I think gets more obvious when you read between the lines with everything else that he says about pale blood following it. Oh, okay. Nemo says, to clarify again, you would assume the Japanese is written first. All right, thank you. And yeah, Global Sequence says, item descriptions change with certain updates. So I guess like another example would be to go off with what Global Sequence said, and welcome back to the stream, by the way, is that if you compare like the 1.0 version of Elden Ring specifically, there's a lot of English text which is missing a lot of flavor, particularly like the spells. I have like a lot of 1.0 footage. I could just pull something up real quick. 1.0 item. Oh, I'm in the wrong folder. All right, so let's go to the Morgott one because that one's the funniest to me. Went too far. Oh no, this is the remembrance. Boss items is the one that I want. I mean, this is fine, but okay. Oh, that was it. So, Crown of Renala, Full Moon Witch, Robe of Renala, Full Moon Witch, robe worn by Morgott, the Elden Lord. I mean, depending on how you want to like really think about FromSoft within the confines of that sentence, you could definitely say there's been updates over time, which corrects lore. Morgoth third, the last of all kings, right? Okay, so thank you guys for all those questions. Hopefully that addresses them as well as I possibly could. So let's go back to the video, and I've kind of almost forgotten what point we just left on, so I'm going to back up a little bit. Sorry, there we go.
Before. This is possibly hinted at in the item description of Bernthal's armor. The golden tree shining throughout the lands between is an illusion cast over the real Erdtree, and you can see some obvious evidence of this at the entrance. You can see that wooden bark is surrounding the entrance, and there is a bit of a slit that extends a ways above the door, showing more of that bark. Another theory that I believe is also from Tarnished archaeologists, but I could be misremembering, is that the Crucible, the primordial Erdtree, was made up of many competing aspects and roots of trees, and that the Erdtree won out. This is where I believe Marika's real tree comes from.
And that is an interpretation, and our friend here has done a lot of work saying like a lot of this stuff is speculative, so I'm not going to be like too stringent on that aspect of it, but I will say like the stuff posited by Tarnished archaeologist isn't explicitly written in the text there.
You see, we never really see the base of the Erdtree in game, and even for those who are able to clip outside of the map, you're still not able to get to the base of the tree. So here comes some more heavy speculation. I think the Erdtree is still technically the Glowmite Queen's tree to rule in, and that Marika, rather than succeeding the Glowmite Queen, is actually unjustly ruling in her stead. And I think we're going to see the base of the Erdtree in the Land of the Shadow. We know that when we see the representations of the thrones before we fight Morgoth, we're seeing the representations of thrones that are situated at the base of the Erdtree. And what do we see when Mesmer is revealed in the trailer? The real version of that very same throne.
Melina in the base of the Erdtree.
This might be the section with the heaviest speculation in this entire video, but here we go. I think that the association with death and the Glowmite Queen is a red herring. I know this seems out of left field, but let's go back to Melina and her moveset for a bit. When we see her fight, she utilizes a dagger that's reminiscent of the daggers the Black Knife assassins use, but instead she uses golden energy to fight. This connects her to the Newman, but in a very unique way. As this theory is partially hinged upon Melina being the Glowmite Queen, then her using gold as a weapon seems so unlike the Queen that's been described through item descriptions and dialogue. Something to keep in mind is that death is taboo in Marika's era. So it would make sense that all that is recorded of her in the history of the Lands Between is her association with destined death. But as I suggested earlier, she had possession of the entire Elden Ring. And even though I don't believe the Greater Will cares much about the particular expression of an era of order, there does seem to be some association with gold and the Greater Will.
So just to go back to the whole death is a taboo thing, I think that's a really good point, but this is kind of why I made my last video questioning when exactly death was removed from the Elden Ring, because if one assumes that death was removed when Godfrey and Marika came to power, that kind of raises the questions that our man's is bringing up here, whereas I feel like if death was removed later on, around like the time Radagon became Elden Lord, or like towards the end of the Age of Abundance, whatever you want to like call it, or even after Godfrey to some time degree, then you do have this possibility of the compatibility of death and Melina existing post arrival of the Erdtree and whatnot. But good questions here.
The Elden Ring itself is a golden color. The sap dripping from what I suggested is the real Erdtree is a golden color. The Elden Beast has gold within it, as well as a golden Erdtree-like tail when viewed in its entirety. However, something that stands out in particular about the Elden Beast's appearance is that shadowy blackness that surrounds its form. When the Elden Ring is complete, death seems to just be another aspect of its power. So what about her being born at the base of the Erdtree and her mother?
So he did say, Pigsy, keep in mind that like this whole bit was more speculation based, which is perfectly fine, but that also doesn't mean like you can't like try to poke holes in his theory. But he's just saying like, you know, this is his thoughts right here, and he might not be totally hell-bent on this interpretation. But to speak to that point more directly here, I think it is a bit of a jump, even if it's like listed as speculation, that the inky blackness within the Elden Beast is related to death specifically. I feel like you would really need to substantiate such a claim more so than he has right here. And then So Kyle asks, why did Ronnie bother killing her body and the Two Fingers if she's going to fill the role of an Empyrean starting a new age? That's an excellent question, which we don't have a direct answer for. And many people theorize the reason Ronnie needed to kill her Two Fingers is because they may have tried to usurp control over her age or her body and pilot her like a literal puppet, which is kind of ironic because she does become a literal puppet. But anyway, for some reason, Ronnie doesn't like the control of the Two Fingers, which is kind of like a big red flag to me as to why we as players probably shouldn't place so much trust implicitly in the Two Fingers as well. Yeah, and as Nemo says, she wanted to be a god that was not tethered to the greater will. We don't necessarily know if the greater will was the issue or if it's the Two Fingers specifically, but if she's still an Empyrean despite killing her Two Fingers, then the greater will might not be the issue, but we will never have the full picture.
They're being inside the Erdtree. Well, there are two theories that stand out to me in the framework of how I view the lore of this game, and regarding the first, something that's been pointed out in quite a few Reddit posts and lore videos is that the Newman race and the Nox are likely one and the same. Not only that, but their society is matriarchal. You'll have to trust me on that one, as it would take way too long to explain why that may be the case. But with that being said, I believe the Erdtree had already sprouted from the Crucible long before the Glowmite Queen and Marika's reigns. Why? Again, the awesome YouTuber Tarnished Archaeologists convinced me with their videos that the era of the dragons and beastmen would be considered ancient in comparison to Marika's era. Now, I do think both the Glowmite Queen and Marika were around for the sprouting, and that one...
So, I think the biggest issue with this timeline here is that it might inadvertently ignore the bits of text which say or suggest that the Erdtree was birthed during, before, or immediately after the war against the Giants. It's not technically explicit, but we certainly know that it kind of coincides with that event. We don't know which exactly came first. Like, was the Erdtree born and then did the Giants retaliate? Or did they fight the Giants to begin the age of the Erdtree? We don't have the exact details on that specifically, but at the very least we can say, according to the game's admittedly mostly hearsay text, the Erdtree was birthed around that time, which might poke a hole in his theory, but I don't know how well that interacts with his kind of disassociation of like the Golden Tree thought to the Erdtree, which is a little bit unfortunate and can't really be helped as far as like the rest of analyzing this video goes. Kyle asks, was the Glowmite Queen controlled by the Greater Will? Well, we're told that she was potentially also chosen by by the Two Fingers, so that could be a possible interpretation. But keep in mind, like, if one believes that the Finger Slayer Blade could be related to the Glowmite Queen, she may have also rebelled and tried to kill her fingers and may have been turned into that blade. But of course, like, that's a completely different line of thought that maybe I shouldn't bring up, but I'm just saying, like, the possibilities are out there. Like, X-Files themes intensify. Alright, going back.
Once Marika supplanted the Glowmite Queen, the Erdtree became the predominant theology of the lands between, if you will. Meaning, no longer is this the Crucible era, even if people were hanging on to that as they saw the Erdtree sprout, but now it's officially the era of the Erdtree. Now, I love the lore of the Newman and the Nox, so perhaps I'll go deeper on that in another video if people enjoy this one. But
oh yeah, and like the Newman and the Nox thing is arguable, and that's pretty much all I say. All I will say about that, just because like he kind of made his position clear, and it's either you buy it or you don't. And hello, Feo, welcome on in. The War of the Fire Giants and the War of the Ice Giant Titans is much older than each other in your theory crafting. You've come to the conclusion that the Giant War and astrologers is closer than I think. Could you elaborate on what you mean by closer than I think? Like closer to what, the Shattering, or the Big Bang, essentially?
Or the Newman and the Nox, so perhaps I'll go deeper on that in another video if people enjoy this one. but I've come to believe that there was possibly multiple cycles of a new ruler and civilization taking over abruptly and reordering the world during the Crucible era, and then probably during that brief period before the Erdtree had fully grown, both literally and theologically. I think the last civilization to do so was probably the Newman civilization just before Marika took her reign. And to dump even further heavy speculation on this section, I think it's possible that the mother of the Glowmite Queen and Marika was the god preceding the Glowmite Queen. I'm not particularly in favor of this theory. It's just something that makes sense to me in the framework of how I see the lore of the game. It's the next theory that I think is more likely. And that one is that Melina is, in a way, Marika's daughter, but not the Marika we see at the end of the game. Instead, it's the version of Marika I suggested may have existed before Radagon split from her, and perhaps a being that doesn't share the same name as Marika.
Alright, that's fine. It's just kind of funny because earlier in the video he said the Glowmite Queen could be her sister, and now she could also potentially be her daughter. That's perfectly fine, but hopefully he does a good job justifying these claims in the moment here. Hey Hilko, nice to see you again.
Considering this theory as the most likely to me, is that Melina throughout the game has ample opportunity to explicitly say Marika is her mother. And considering she tells us things that Marika says at different locations throughout the game, it's puzzling that she doesn't. Instead, she only refers to Marika as Queen Marika. And yet she does reference having a mother, but she chooses to refer to her mother as mother. Some may suggest that she does this because she doesn't want to reveal that Marika is her mother, but I think I strongly disagree with this perspective.
Oh yeah, I did have the thought earlier in the stream when he was talking about Melina and something, I don't remember the exact context, that one thing which might have strengthened his point earlier is that we're told that that Melina is burned and bodiless and she lost her memory, and that could help contextualize all that other stuff with why she might not really remember being the Glowmite Queen, or like why her fighting style might be a little bit different, or all of this other manner of thing. You can't wait until we get a one finger in the DLC. Will it be the middle finger without horns?
By stating that her mother resides or resided within the Erdtree to our Tarnished, from a lore perspective, she'd be stating that to a person who learns that only one person exists within the Erdtree, Marika. If she wanted to keep that connection secret, why would she say something like that to a person whose worldview will now lead them to believe she's talking about Marika? To me, I think this may be a misdirection meant to throw us off the trail of Melina's true origin. And with that, we move on to the final section.
Mesmer, deception, and let's end this thing.
At 1 minute and 35 seconds, Mesmer appears, and my brain exploded. The first little bit of research I did connected me to the Caduceus staff wielded by the Roman god Mercury, due to the imagery of two-headed snakes and wings. Then that led me to the Sumerian god, I'm gonna try it, Ningishzida? I don't know. That seems to be the earliest version of this myth. And the current consensus on the meaning of this name, I'm gonna try it again, Ningishzida, is the Lord of the Good Tree. And I mean, that's, like, what a coincidence. He seemed to be associated with both snakes and the underworld. Now, I stopped there with that line of research, but this is probably not a dead end, but I'll leave that route for another day. Mesmer is probably the biggest reason I was inspired to make this video. He's the reason I think Marika's original unsplit form wasn't just a Newman, but probably also a combination of many things considered by the Golden Order to be blasphemous. If it wasn't obvious with him asking his mother why she would lordship sanction someone, behind him is a statue of a woman that seems to be wearing the same clothes we typically see Marika in, holding a baby. Although some of these translations are suspect, in one of Miyazaki's interviews, he seems to outright say that he's a child of Marika. However, something that I'm sure people are talking about, but
he doesn't quite say it so directly. He says he has like the same status as the demigods, which is woefully vague, especially when we're told that Godfrey was a demigod, because he might not be Marika's child, but who knows. So, I thought I saw a question that I wanted to address. I'm being blind. Alright. Demigod is already vague enough. Yeah.
isn't something I've seen in discussion so far, is that his flame starts off in his hand pitch black, just like the red and black flames of the Rune of Death. So, in summary, Mesmer is adorned with and displays everything considered blasphemous by the Golden Order, maybe minus omen horns. His appearance has also been likened by many to be heavily inspired by Satan, or the deceiving red dragon and serpent that we talked about. He has an eye reminiscent of dragon eyes. He resides in an underworldly, shadowy place that displays a tree snaking around another tree and pulling it down to steal its sap and direct it into a bowl. Unlike Rykard, however, these things seem to be a part of who he is rather than something that was done to him after being eaten. And you're saying to me he's Marika's child. This is what triggered me to come to the conclusion that if she can birth a child like that guy, Marika's complete and original form was probably like that of, in the context of the Golden Order, a truly blasphemous and deceiving serpent, or a dragon, or probably both. And in the context of the Elden Ring universe, what could be more blasphemous than unjustly supplanting the chosen god of the Greater Will, and then once becoming the god herself, conspiring to kill both herself, the Elden Ring, and preventing the cycle of new orders of the Greater Will from continuing? Now, where did I get that last part from? Well, something that's bothered me about Gideon's betrayal and supposedly Marika wanting us to struggle eternally, and then Hugh's mission for Marika is that at
Bro, I've not seen the Tree Sentinels do that. Oh, well, I don't use magic. Never mind.
supposedly Marika last part from. Well, something that's bothered me about Gideon's betrayal and supposedly Marika wanting us to struggle eternally, and then Hugh's mission.
That is hilarious. Sorry to poop on the lore here for a second, but I've literally never seen this attack.
Gideon's betrayal and supposedly Marika wanting us to struggle eternally, and then Hugh's mission for Marika is that at first, these two goals of Marika seem to contradict. How can she want no one to become Elden Lord while also tasking Hugh with creating a weapon that can kill a god? Well, there is something that happens at the end of the game that's convinced me they're both true, and they're both a part of her plan. After burning our way into the Erdtree, using the Frenzy Flame of course, because I'm sure none of you are psychotic monsters who would burn Melina alive to get in here, right? Right? Okay. After entering the Erdtree, we're attacked by Radagon, a person that some people in the community believe tricked Gideon into thinking he was discovering the will of Marika, but instead was being manipulated by Radagon into keeping the Shattered Golden Order era in place. If this were true, then Radagon is directly resisting the will of the Greater Will. So, we kill him. Disobedience stopped. However, instead of the battle ending there, the Elden Ring itself turns Radagon into a weapon that's description hints that this is a punishment. And then, it attacks us. The very same person that stopped Radagon from preventing the next era of order from beginning. Doesn't the Greater Will want us to mend the Elden Ring and then become Elden Lord for a new order? Well, let's revisit Hugh. He is tasked with making for us a weapon that can kill Marika. Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, and the Elden Ring is also the Elden Beast.
So, he might be right about that by saying Marika wants a weapon that can kill herself, but one could also make the argument that the god Marika wants to kill could be the Elden Beast, which I think is important to keep in mind here. So there could be a bit more nuance to it.
A vassal beast for the Greater Will sent to bring order to the lands between in its stead as a vassal. If we kill Marika, the Elden Ring, the very thing the Greater Will sent to bring order to the lands between in his stead, dies with her. You may have noticed that the Elden Beast seeps out of Radagon first, and when it forms itself, it retains a scar in the same place Marika was stabbed with that red spear. However, it's just as likely the scar could be from the Elden Ring when it's shattered. Both scenarios lead me to the same conclusion. Damage to her is damage to the Elden Beast, and vice versa. So, if we kill her, we kill it. Which is why it's no surprise that it separated itself from Radagon so that it could defend itself. If you need further proof of this interpretation, look at the words that appear when we kill the Elden Beast. God slain. Remember, we just killed Radagon, a being that's supposedly a part of a single god, and we saw nothing. Now, we kill the Elden Beast, and we're told we killed a god? Well, who's the god of the lands between? Marika. And we just killed her. And with her, the Elden Ring. We've been had. She's dead. The Elden Beast is dead. And therefore...
And so for anybody who thinks that little bit right there might be too far out there, it is kind of also somewhat corroborated in the remembrance of the Elden Beast. Or it's more like the Sacred Relic Blade, isn't it? Yeah. Which you get from the remembrance. So, thoughts: a sword wrought from the remains of a god who should have lived a life eternal. This could be a reference to Marika, or it could potentially be a reference to the Elden Beast. So, I guess it's ambiguous, but I really wish we knew what the hell happened to Marika in like the 4 identical endings, you know? Like, is she there? Is she not there? Man, just the base amount of info from Soft is like, nah, bro, you don't need that. Elden Beast music in the game files is called Marika's theme. That's not too surprising. I don't know how seriously we should take stuff like that sometimes, just because like not everything is always that direct to the titles of the scores at times. Which I'm not saying like don't fully like discard that. That might be something to keep in mind. Excuse me. But I'm trying to think of other examples. Like the Moonlight Butterfly is also used for Gwendolyn, so it's not always that cut and dry. And then Pixie said the god-slaying black flame could also be referring to the Elden Beast. I don't know about that, because like if the god was referring to the Elden Beast, then why are like the god skins covered in like humanoid skins rather than like pseudo Elden Beast skins? Sorry, I was coughing again. Pixie says this is the least out there part of the video, in your opinion. It's all good. I just want to like keep everyone, you know, somewhat grounded. Galamoth doesn't know if they'd consider the beast a god. It's a vassal beast manifestation of order itself. Yeah, but to be fair, we are given like the god slain text. And then Crunchy says, technically Gwendolyn's theme is used for the Moonlight Butterfly. I feel like no matter which way you look at it, you could, you know, compare it to the Elden Beast Marika situation, but yeah. Okay, going back here.
For the Elden Ring is dead. And we did it. Now, I know what you're thinking. Gideon says she doesn't want an Elden Lord, and you mend the Elden Ring with her and become Elden Lord in many of the endings. Correct. But, remember, the Elden Ring was already shattered, and the mending rune we brought with us was meant to repair it from the shattering, in a state where it was still alive. But, it's not anymore. Which means, we are now a consort to a dead god, a dead Elden Ring, and a dead incarnation of the ideals of the Greater Will. To me, this means we end the game in another false age, like the one we just ended. Now, ruling and struggling by our own ideals and decisions, without the influence of the Greater Will. Just like Marika planned. She deceived us. She deceived Gideon. And she even deceived her other self. And that's it. The end of this needlessly convoluted theory. Thanks for watching, and if y'all like this one, maybe I'll make more lore videos like this in the future. Until then, peace.
Alright, so despite a lot of the hangups that I had with it, I did actually enjoy the video. I appreciated the speculative nature in which like he was very clear about his opinions here, and the lengths at which he went to like try to credit other people's or try to make clear where his ideas were coming from in general to make it easier to follow along. Now, obviously, I had some issues always following along, but sometimes that's just how it goes. It's, you know, difficult to get everything perfect and instantly understood by a wide variety of people to begin with. So with all that being said, I am going to go ahead and like a Tragedies video here. I've already linked it into the chat if you want to give him some support as well. So, like I said throughout the video, I do think there are some issues with the continuity of his timeline by trying to say that the Gloam-Eyed Queen is Melina and predates Marika's reign, and trying to reconcile Melina telling us that she was born at the foot of the Erdtree. I don't think he did that job well enough, although maybe I might have like missed the points. I don't know. It just didn't answer the question for me. I don't know how do you guys feel about that part of the video in chat? Did I just kind of like space out while I was like thinking about other stuff, or do you think he satisfactorily answered that question for you? Without Horns thinks Marika and the Elden Beast are God, little g, not God, capital G, as in the Abrahamic tradition. Copy Ninja, welcome on in. You don't get what his point is, though. So, yeah, what does that say about the Shadow of the Erdtree stuff? I'm not sure either, now that you mention it. But, I don't know. To me, that isn't like necessarily like a bad thing. I like being on a journey. I don't necessarily care if there's like an upfront thesis statement and then all that stuff. Hey, Crunchy, you missed the music bit. What was being referenced there? He said in the fight with the Elden Beast, it's called Marika's theme. Not Marika's theme? It might have been like internally labeled as Marika's theme. But I haven't seen that. And at least for the official soundtrack names, it's called Elden Beast. So, Philanthropist liked the vid, bro was chill, and good speculation. Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. So, sorry, I just kind of spaced out. So, I think like the main point of his video was that he thinks that the Golemite Queen had a tree and preceded Marika as like the god of the vessel, but Marika's Erdtree isn't necessarily like the Erdtree, but I'm not entirely sure how he feels about that, and that could just be because of my hangups on knowing that Golden Tree in Japanese equals Erdtree, like explicitly there. Crunchy says, it's interesting because the music that plays during Melina's sacrifice is a version of the same music. Interesting. I'll add that to my collection. No, it's all good. Yeah, I appreciate that insight. So before moving on here, I'm going to actually make a comment on his video here. Hey, bro, I enjoyed the video and how well you set up what was your speculation and how you tried to frame your... What's the word? I tried you frame the basis of your ideas. I reacted to it live on my channel. If you want the most direct feedback to your video, a few things. As far as the localization of the Erdtree is concerned, in interviews with Miyazaki, Golden Tree Ogonju is just what the Erdtree is always called in Japanese. The other thing I'd like to address is that the removal of the rod isn't guaranteed to have happened at the start of Marika and Godfrey's reign, and it's possible the Golden Order was established later, towards the end of the Age of Abundance / Radagon becoming Elden Lord. That might help recontextualize Melina's / Gex usage of death, even if it was still technically Marika's reign then. Peace, winky face. Alright. Oh, Crunchy has a short on the Elden Beast theme? Yeah, I pretty much always close like the short sections, and I really don't get like a lot of recommendations of those, so I will need to check that out sometime. Nemo wonders how much the music matters. We're dealing with Toby Fox here. We're not dealing with it. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, as Without Horn says, A Tragedy believes that the Glowmide Queen's Erdtree is like the main tree in the Shadow one, and Marika's tree is the one choking it for its sap in the Shadowlands. Yeah, that's probably like the big main thesis. Yeah, I went on so many tangents, it's kind of hard to remember everything I watched. I think that's an interesting idea. I'm obviously like, you know, skeptical of it, but it's fun to have those new perspectives shared with us in this kind of format here. So, okay. Yeah, all right. I think that's pretty much going to be the end of this stream, guys. We don't. I've gone over time, and I feel like we don't have enough time to really get into Zafe the Scholar's video here. So that'll probably be it for tonight. So we will go live again at the same time tomorrow. Like I was saying earlier in the stream, I think I'm a little bit shadowed of the Erdtree out. So I kind of want to look back at more of like the base game lore and or Dark Souls stuff. So I might start looking at a couple Dark Souls videos tomorrow, maybe a Bloodborne one the next day, and or Elden Ring intermittently, like throughout all that stuff. So just kind of stay posted while I figure stuff out. I'll probably like need to make a new thumbnail so it doesn't seem as though I'm only covering Shadow of the Erdtree. But anyway, that's a me problem, not a you problem. Appreciate all of you guys hopping in the streams as always. I believe I said it, but we're going live again, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, till next time, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.